thanks for joining. Find your most relaxing position, take a slow breath in, and let's begin our very quiet stroll through history. And if you feel like these videos are of any use to you, then you can like and subscribe, but only if you really feel like it. And now, let's begin. In the dim, flickering glow of a medieval alehouse, the clang of wooden mugs and the hearty laughter of peasants might make you think you've stumbled into a 14th century frat party. But hold your horses, or your oxen rather. Medieval folks certainly enjoyed their ale, but the notion of them being in a perpetual state of inebriation is more myth than reality. Let's navigate the murky waters of medieval merriment and see just how tipsy these times really were. First up, let's talk alehouses and taverns. These were the social hubs of medieval towns, where folks gathered not just to drink, but to gossip, catch up on news, and occasionally plot a rebellion or two. Ale was the drink of choice, not because everyone wanted to party like it was 1399, but because clean water was harder to find than a sober Viking. Ale was safer, thanks to the brewing process, which killed off harmful bacteria. It was essentially liquid bread, providing calories and hydration in one foamy package. Economically, ale was as indispensable as it was intoxicating. In the medieval village economy, ale was a staple, brewed by women known as alewives. It was a domestic craft, like knitting or bread-making, but with the added bonus of a buzz. Alewives were essential to the community, and their brewing operations were a significant part of the local economy. According to records from the period, a gallon of ale cost about a penny in the early 1300s, which was affordable for most workers who earned roughly a penny a day. Sure, they weren't making it rain, but they could afford a pint or two. Now, let's clear up a common misconception. Medieval peasants weren't staggering around in a drunken stupor 24/7. While it's true that ale was consumed more frequently than water, it was typically low in alcohol content. Think of it as a medieval session beer. Most ale had an alcohol by volume, ABV, of around 1–3%, far less potent than modern beers. So, while everyone from peasants to princesses was sipping on ale, they weren't necessarily getting sloshed. In fact, sobriety was more common than you might think. Many peasants couldn't afford to drink themselves into oblivion, and even if they could, the demands of daily labor didn't allow for much downtime. Interestingly, primary sources from the time, like the writings of monks, often show a world where moderation was more common than excess. Monks, those medieval multitaskers, were some of the most prolific brewers. Their monastic rules often dictated moderation in all things, including drinking. For instance, the rule of St. Benedict advised moderation, allowing monks to drink but warning against excess. This wasn't just spiritual advice, it was practical. Too much ale, and a monk might find himself snoozing during Vespers. Tax records also provide a sobering glimpse into medieval drinking habits. Ale was taxed heavily, not just because it was a source of revenue, but because authorities wanted to control consumption. The assize of ale, a regulation from the 13th century, determined the quality and price of ale, ensuring it remained accessible but not overly intoxicating. It was a delicate balance between keeping the populace happy and preventing disorder. So, why do we have this image of medieval people as perennial party animals? Part of it comes from romanticized tales and the allure of a time when life seemed simpler and merriment more honest. But it's also about misunderstanding the role of alcohol in medieval society. Sure, there were drunken revelries, just as there are today, but they were the exception, not the rule. When medieval folks did let loose, it was often during festivals or special occasions, moments when the usual grind of life could be temporarily set aside. In sum, the medieval drinking scene was a tapestry woven with social necessity, economic reality, and cultural moderation. Alehouses and taverns were more than just places to guzzle ale, they were the medieval equivalent of Facebook, where news spread and communities bonded. The economics of ale ensured that it was a staple, not a luxury, and while it was consumed daily, it wasn't always consumed to excess. So, next time you're toasting to history, remember, medieval peasants might have raised their mugs often, but they did so with a surprising sobriety, a far cry from the legendary debauchery we've come to imagine. Now, while we're still riding the high of debunking the myth of medieval folks as perpetual partygoers, let's shift our gaze to the liquid stars of the era, ale and mead. These weren't just beverages. They were the lifeblood of medieval society, the medieval equivalent of a well-crafted espresso or artisanal kombucha. But instead of being sipped by hipsters in a trendy cafe, these drinks were guzzled by everyone from kings to commoners. First up, ale. We've established that ale was the medieval hydration solution, brewed not just for pleasure, but for survival. But what exactly went into this medieval super drink? The recipe was deceptively simple: water, malted grains like barley, and yeast. Yet, the process was less about exact science and more about artisanal flair. Ale brewing was a domestic affair, often carried out in the hearths of homes by women, who were the unsung heroes, or rather heroines of medieval brewing. These alewives, as they were known, were pivotal to their communities, crafting brews that nourished as much as they inebriated. Economically, brewing was one of the few industries where women could hold a significant stake. Think of alewives as the original girl bosses, running small businesses long before it became a trend. They wielded their brewing knowledge like a secret recipe, passing it down through generations. The alehouse was the medieval equivalent of a Starbucks on every corner, but with way more character and far less corporate branding. Now, let's talk numbers. The cost of a gallon of ale in the 14th century was about a penny. With the average labourer earning a penny a day, that made ale an affordable staple. It was like the bread and butter of their diet, except it was actually liquid bread. The brewing process also served another crucial function. It made water safe to consume. Given the dubious quality of medieval water supplies, ale was the safer bet. It was like choosing bottled water over tap, with the added benefit of a mild buzz. Enter mead, the drink of choice for those with a taste for the sweet side of life. Mead, often dubbed the nectar of the gods, was a honey-based brew that traced its roots back to ancient times. It was a bit more luxurious than ale, often reserved for special occasions or those with deeper pockets. Making mead was a labour of love, requiring honey, water, and sometimes fruits or spices for flavour. It fermented over months, unlike ale, which was ready in days. This patient process made mead a special treat, more akin to a fine wine than a casual drink. The ingredients for mead were pricier too. Honey wasn't exactly flowing like water, ale in the medieval market. It was a precious commodity, which made mead more expensive and exclusive. Despite this, it was cherished for its taste and its cultural significance. Mead was often associated with celebrations and ceremonies, adding a touch of sweetness to weddings and feasts. In fact, the term honeymoon is thought to have originated from the tradition of newlyweds drinking mead for a month after their wedding to ensure fertility and happiness, a medieval take on happy wife, happy life. Women also played a key role in mead production, often using their knowledge of herbs and spices to enhance the flavour. This wasn't just about making a tasty drink, it was a blend of culinary art and science, with women as the master brewers. The process of brewing, whether ale or mead, was a communal effort, often involving the whole family. It was like a medieval bake-off, except with more fermentation and fewer soggy bottoms. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the social dynamics at play here. Brewing was one of the few industries where women could exercise agency, and their skill was respected and valued. The alewives and mead makers were central figures in their communities, providing a service that was as essential as it was enjoyable. Yet, they had to navigate a world where their successes were sometimes begrudgingly acknowledged by their male counterparts. A successful alewife could be both celebrated and resented, walking a fine line between admiration and envy. As for the drinking habits themselves, they were dictated by necessity as much as by choice. The dubious water quality meant that drinks like ale and mead weren't just indulgences, they were crucial for survival. It's a hard pill or pint to swallow, but it's the truth. These beverages provided calories and nutrients that supplemented the often meagre medieval diet. They were more than just libations, they were lifelines. In terms of brewing innovations, the medieval period was surprisingly dynamic. The techniques and recipes evolved over time, influenced by trade and cultural exchanges. As trade routes expanded, so did the availability of new ingredients and the sharing of brewing knowledge. This was a time when experimentation was encouraged, leading to diverse flavours and styles. It was like the craft beer revolution, but with more monks and fewer hipsters. The brewing process itself was both art and alchemy. It required careful attention to detail and a deep understanding of the ingredients. This wasn't just about throwing some grains and yeast into a pot and hoping for the best. It was a meticulous process that involved trial and error, experimentation, and a dash of luck. The result was a drink that was as varied as the people who brewed it. So, as we peel back the layers of medieval drinking culture, it's clear that these beverages were more than just a way to wet one's whistle. They were an integral part of the social and economic fabric, woven into the daily lives of people from all walks of life. They were a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of those who crafted them, and a reminder that sometimes the simplest pleasures are the most essential. In the next part of our journey, we'll delve deeper into the cultural and social implications of these drinks, exploring how they shaped communities and influenced the course of history. We've only just begun to tap the keg of medieval merriment, so stick around, there's plenty more to pour over. While we've been on this delightful detour through the ale-soaked lanes of medieval life, let's now crash the party, literally. Medieval festivals and feasts were the grand showcases of communal drinking, where ale and mead flowed like rivers and social norms took a temporary backseat. These events weren't just about getting blitzed, though. They were the medieval equivalent of a networking event, with a side of revelry. Take, for instance, the famed Feast of Fools. This wasn't your average potluck. It was a topsy-turvy carnival where the social order flipped on its head. For a day, the lowly could mock the mighty, and the mighty could pretend to enjoy it. Ale and wine greased the wheels of this chaotic camaraderie, dissolving social barriers faster than you can say, "Cheers." But don't be fooled by the anarchic appearance. This was a carefully orchestrated release valve for societal tension, a chance for the common folk to blow off steam without, actually blowing up the town. The cultural significance of these gatherings can't be overstated. Festivals like these were rare moments of collective joy, offering a break from the grind of medieval life, which often felt like a never-ending episode of Survivor. They were also prime opportunities for social bonding. Imagine your modern office party, but with less awkward small talk and more ale-fueled singing. Drinking together was a great equalizer, a way to forge and cement relationships across the social spectrum. Now, let's rewind to the courtly halls of medieval diplomacy, where alcohol played a starring role in political theatre. Picture this, a grand banquet, complete with roasted boar, jesters, and, of course, goblets of mead. But these weren't just merry gatherings. They were power plays disguised as feasts. Kings and lords used these occasions to broker peace, negotiate alliances, and sometimes even hatch plots. The alcohol served here wasn't just for loosening tongues, it was a strategic tool for smoothing over tensions and fostering goodwill. Consider the legendary meeting between Richard the Lionheart and Saladin during the Third Crusade. While the two never shared a drink directly, their emissaries certainly did, exchanging toasts as a gesture of diplomatic respect. The medieval belief was that sharing a drink was akin to sharing trust. This was less about the alcohol content and more about the content of character it supposedly revealed. Drinking together was a symbolic act, one that spoke louder than words in a time when a slip of the tongue could lead to a slip of the knife. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. While the idea of knights clinking goblets in chivalric camaraderie is appealing, the reality was often more transactional. Drinking could be a calculated move, a way to curry favour or lull an opponent into complacency. In a world where alliances were as fragile as a medieval goblet, every sip was a potential power play. Of course, not all drinking was politically charged. Sometimes a goblet of ale was just that, a momentary escape from the harshness of reality. Medieval life was brutal. Famine, plague, and war were as common as ye old potholes on a dirt road. Alcohol offered a brief respite, a chance to forget one's troubles, if only for an evening. It was a coping mechanism as much as it was a celebration. The economic implications of these drinking customs were significant. Feasts and festivals required vast quantities of ale and mead, stimulating local economies and providing income for brewers and tavern owners. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. The peasants got their party, and the brewers got their business. The festivals were like medieval stimulus packages, injecting life into local markets. But before we start imagining medieval England as one big Oktoberfest, let's dial back to reality. Not everyone could afford to partake in these grand feasts. For many peasants, the closest they got to a royal banquet was hearing about it third hand from a bard who'd had one too many. The divide between the haves and have-nots was as stark as ever, even with ale in hand. Economic disparity was a sobering reality in a time where a good harvest could mean the difference between life and death. In these gatherings, the alehouse or tavern was the social hub, the medieval version of a watering hole where ideas flowed as freely as the drinks. It was here that community ties were strengthened, where news was exchanged quicker than a carrier pigeon could flap its wings. The alehouse was the stage for local politics, where decisions were made and alliances forged over a pint or two. And while we're on the topic of myth-busting, let's address the stereotype of the perpetually merry medieval drunk. Yes, there were times of excess, and yes, people sometimes drank to the point of oblivion. But that wasn't the norm. Drinking had its place and purpose, woven into the social fabric in a way that was both pragmatic and celebratory. The ale may have flowed, but it was the conversations and connections that truly mattered. In the grand tapestry of medieval society, alcohol was a vibrant thread, integral to both daily life and momentous occasions. It was a tool for survival, a vehicle for social interaction, and a symbol of unity and division in equal measure. So the next time you raise a glass, spare a thought for the medieval revellers who, whether in peasant garb or knightly armour, knew the power of a good drink to bring people together or drive them apart. As we continue our exploration of medieval merriment, we'll delve deeper into the roles individuals played in these drinking ceremonies and how these interactions shaped the social structures of the day. There's still plenty more medieval magic to uncover, so stay tuned as we keep unearthing the stories behind the sips. While we sip our way through medieval merriment, it's time to pull back the tapestry and peek at the rules and regulations that aim to keep these drinking escapades under control. Because, let's face it, when you mix humans and alcohol, things can get as chaotic as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Enter the medieval authorities with their quills and parchments, trying to impose some order on the ale-fueled antics of the populace. First up, let's talk tavern hours. Today, we take for granted the idea that bars and pubs have set opening and closing times, but in medieval times, the concept was a bit more fluid-like, the patrons after a long night. However, by the 14th century, local governments started enforcing restrictions on when alehouses could operate. This wasn't just about ensuring everyone got a good night's sleep. It was a matter of public safety and, more importantly, maintaining social order. In London, for instance, a 1393 ordinance declared that taverns must close by 9 p.m. That's right, folks, last call was long before the witching hour. Why the curfew? Well, it turns out that a bunch of tipsy townsfolk stumbling about in the dark could lead to all sorts of shenanigans, from brawls to burglaries. The authorities feared that the chaos of nighttime revelry could spill over into daylight and disrupt the fragile peace of medieval life. Plus, with most people relying on candlelight, the risk of accidentally setting the town on fire wasn't just a drunken fantasy, it was a real concern. But it wasn't just the hours that were regulated. The quality and strength of the ale were also under scrutiny. Enter the Assize of Ale, a set of regulations that sought to ensure standardization. Think of it as the medieval FDA, minus the bureaucracy and alphabet soup of acronyms. The Assize dictated everything from the price of ale to its potency. This regulation was crucial because, while ale was a daily staple, its affordability and quality directly impacted public health and morale. Now, what about penalties for those who went a pint too far? Drunkenness wasn't seen as a charming quirk back then, more like a civic nuisance. Records from the time tell tales of public punishments for those who overindulged. In some towns, habitual drunkards might find themselves in the stocks, enduring jeers and the occasional rotten vegetable. And if you were really unlucky, you might end up with a stint in the pillory, a wooden contraption that held you by the neck and wrists, turning you into the medieval equivalent of a public meme. The authorities weren't just concerned with the individual drinker, though. Tavern keepers had their share of responsibilities too. Selling bad ale or overcharging wasn't just bad business, it was illegal. A dishonest alewife could face fines or even lose her license to brew. This was serious business because, remember, ale was more than just a drink, it was a dietary staple. The church, ever the moral compass of the era, also had its say in matters of merriment. Monasteries, those bastions of medieval brewing, often set standards for moderation. But church influence didn't just stop at the abbey walls. The ecclesiastical courts had a hand in policing public behaviour, ensuring that Sunday wasn't just a hangover recovery day. In some cases, individuals hauled before these courts for drunken misconduct would face penance, a spiritual slap on the wrist, if you will. The interplay between church and state in regulating drinking was a delicate dance. On one hand, the church advocated for moderation and temperance, viewing excessive drinking as a slippery slope to sin. On the other hand, the state saw regulation as a way to maintain order and fill the coffers through taxes and fines. It was a classic case of moral ideals colliding with economic realities, a tug-of-war that continues in various forms to this day. Speaking of economic realities, let's not forget the tax angle. Ale taxes were a significant source of revenue for local governments. By taxing ale, authorities could fund public works and line their own pockets. But these taxes weren't just about the money, they were also a tool for controlling consumption. By making ale more expensive, authorities hoped to curb excessive drinking. It was the medieval version of a sin tax, a not-so-subtle way of saying, drink, but don't overdo it. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with these regulations. The tavern was a rare refuge from the harshness of medieval life, a place where one could temporarily forget about feudal dues and crop failures. For many, the idea of a government-imposed closing time was as welcome as a cold ale on a snowy day. But there were limits, and crossing them could mean a date with the stocks, or worse. The records of transgressions from that time are a fascinating window into daily life. They show us not just the legal framework of the era, but also the human stories behind the laws, from the alewives fined for watering down their brews to the rowdy patrons who couldn't hold their ale or their tongues. These tales paint a vivid picture of a society trying to balance enjoyment with order. So, was medieval society one big party with a few rules thrown in for good measure? Not quite. The regulations surrounding drinking were as much about maintaining social harmony as they were about curbing excess. They reflected a world where survival depended on community and cooperation, where the alehouse was more than just a place to drink. It was a cornerstone of social life. In the grand scheme of things, these laws and regulations were the medieval attempt at social engineering, a way to mould behaviour and maintain control. They reveal a society striving for stability in a world where unpredictability was the norm. As we continue our journey through the ale-soaked annals of history, we'll see how these rules evolved and what they tell us about the people who lived by them. So, keep your muds at the ready and your wits about you. There's more medieval magic to uncover next time. As the final curtain falls on our medieval saga, let's swing open the tavern doors and waltz into the Renaissance, a time when drinking culture got a makeover as flamboyant as a peacock in a powdered wig. This period, stretching from the 14th to the 17th century, saw a seismic shift in how people raised their goblets and, more importantly, why. It was a time of exploration, not just of new lands but of new ideas, including those swirling in the bottom of a wine glass. First, let's talk about the drink du jour, wine. As trade routes expanded and the Renaissance spirit of curiosity took hold, wine became the new darling of the European drinking scene. Unlike the humble ale, wine was the sophisticated sibling, hailed for its complexity and the prestige it conferred upon those who could afford it. The Italian city-states, flush with cash from banking and trade, became the epicenter of this vinous vogue. Florence, for instance, wasn't just the birthplace of the Renaissance, it was practically the Napa Valley of its day. By the 16th century, Italian wines were gracing the tables of monarchs and merchants alike, symbolizing a shift in both taste and social aspiration. But don't be fooled into thinking everyone was swirling their goblets like sommelier savants. The price of wine was steep, often costing 10 times more than a gallon of ale. For the average, Joe or Giovanni ale remained the everyday drink of choice. Yet, the Renaissance brought with it a change in how people consumed even this staple. The rise of humanism and the printing press meant ideas spread faster than a bar tab at happy hour. Among these ideas was the notion of moderation and temperance, a reaction, perhaps, to the more bacchanalian excesses of the past. And speaking of excess, let's not forget the spirits. By the late Renaissance, distilled spirits like brandy and gin began to make their mark. While distillation had been around since the days of ancient alchemists trying to turn lead into gold, it was in the Renaissance that it truly took off. Spirits were potent, portable, and, to some, practically magic. They were seen as medicinal, a cure-all for ailments from the common cold to melancholia. Of course, the side effect of getting thoroughly sloshed was just a bonus or a hazard, depending on your perspective. Economically, the Renaissance was a boon for brewers and winemakers alike. The increase in trade and urbanization meant a growing market for their products. Taverns multiplied faster than you could say cheers, serving as vital hubs of social and economic activity. In England, by the time of Elizabeth I, London alone boasted over 500 taverns. They were the LinkedIn of their day, albeit with more ale and less networking jargon. Politically, the Renaissance drinking culture was as much about diplomacy as it was about indulgence. Banquets were the boardrooms of the aristocracy, where deals were sealed over clinking glasses. The Treaty of Picquigny in 1475, where Louis XIV of England toasted with wine, was as much about the libations as the negotiations. Sharing a drink was a diplomatic tool, a liquid handshake that transcended language barriers and united warring factions, if only until the last drop was drunk. Now, let's take a step back and consider the myths that have, like a fine wine, aged over time. The image of medieval folks as perpetually tipsy party animals persists, partly because it's more fun to imagine a world where every day is a festival. But the reality was much more nuanced. Medieval and Renaissance drinking was a tapestry woven with threads of necessity, tradition, and evolving social norms. While the legends of inebriated knights and ale-soaked peasants make for good stories, they overlook the practicalities that shape daily life. So, what about the lasting truths? One undeniable fact is the communal nature of drinking in these eras. Whether in a smoky alehouse or a grand hall, drinking was a social act, a way to foster community and camaraderie. It was as much about the people you drank with as what you drank. The medieval alewives and Renaissance vintners understood this, crafting beverages that were as integral to the social fabric as they were to the economy. And let's not forget the impact on today's drinking culture. The Renaissance obsession with wine paved the way for modern viticulture and the global wine industry. The introduction of distilled spirits set the stage for today's cocktail culture. Even the regulations that started in medieval times echo in today's liquor laws and drinking customs. The past, as it turns out, has aged quite well. As we wrap up our journey through the ages, it's worth noting that while the drinks have changed, the essence of why we raise a glass has not. Whether in celebration, consolation, or contemplation, drinking remains a deeply human ritual, one that connects us to our history and to each other. So, the next time you find yourself with a drink in hand, spare a thought for the medieval peasants, the Renaissance revelers, and everyone in between, who knew that while life might be unpredictable, a good drink could make it a little more bearable. In the end, the story of medieval and Renaissance drinking is one of evolution and adaptation, a testament to the resilience and creativity of people throughout history. It's a reminder that behind every pint or goblet lies a tale of human ingenuity and the eternal quest for connection. Cheers to that, and to the stories yet to be told. In the gritty tapestry of 1928 Pittsburgh, the Steel City wrapped in smoke and opportunity, young Andy Warhol came into the world. It wasn't exactly the birthplace of glamorous art movements, more like a place where soot was a fashion accessory. Born to Slovak immigrants, Andy's family was as blue-collar as they come. His father, Andrzej Warhola, toiled in construction, while his mother, Julia, kept the home fires burning, metaphorically speaking, because literal fires would have been just another Tuesday in their neighborhood. The Warholers lived in the kind of financial state that made you think twice before buying brand-name butter. But tough times have a way of nurturing unexpected talents. Little Andy, the youngest of three boys, wasn't exactly out knocking baseballs around. No, he was often kept indoors by a string of illnesses that would make a hypochondriac's head spin. Chorea, a nervous system disease also known as sainting. Vitus's dance left him bedridden for months at a time. His skin, pale and splotchy, made him feel like an outsider in his own life. But it was in this isolation that he found his muse, not a Greek goddess, but good old-fashioned drawing. While other kids were out playing street hockey, Andy was perfecting his sketch of a Campbell's soup can, an image that would one day become more iconic than the very idea of soup itself. His mother, Julia, was his biggest fan, and she encouraged his artistic inclinations with all the fervour of someone who saw their kids' doodles as legitimate masterpieces. It's said she gave him his first drawing lessons, which is a heartwarming image until you realize it was probably just a way to keep him from going stir-crazy. Despite their financial struggles, the Warholers managed to scrape together enough money for Andy to attend college, a big deal when the average annual salary was about $1,036. He enrolled at the Carnegie Institute of Technology in 1945, a place where his artistic talents were honed and his social skills, well, remained a work in progress. Andy wasn't exactly the life of the party, unless that party involved methodically analyzing the latest trends in commercial art. By the time he graduated in 1949, Andy had his sights set on New York City, a place where dreams are made, shattered, and occasionally, if you're lucky, repackaged and sold at a premium. Armed with a degree in pictorial design and a portfolio brimming with promise, he boarded a Greyhound bus bound for the Big Apple. His parents probably wished him well with the kind of optimism that comes from either genuine hope or complete denial. New York in the 1950s was a bustling metropolis that never slept, and neither did Andy, if he could help it. He hit the ground running, or, more accurately, sketching. His first gig was with Glamour magazine, which sounds, well, glamorous, until you realize he was paid just $50 for his first piece. But Andy wasn't in it for the money, at least not yet. His unique style, which blended commercial art with fine art sensibilities, began to catch the eye of the industry's movers and shakers. In those early days, Warhol's life was a series of cramped apartments and questionable dinners, but he was not deterred. His artistic style evolved, drawing on influences from advertising, pop culture, and the mundane objects that surrounded him, things everyone else overlooked. To Warhol, a soup can was not just soup. It was a symbol, a statement, a still life for the modern age. As Warhol's reputation grew, he became known for his distinctive, blotted line technique, and his ability to churn out work with the efficiency of a factory assembly line. His early commercial successes included illustrating shoe ads for Miller, which doesn't sound like much until you realize his whimsical designs helped redefine how fashion was marketed. By 1957, Warhol had racked up enough success to open his own studio, a precursor to the infamous factory that would later become the epicenter of the pop art movement. Yet, even as his star was rising, Warhol remained an enigma, wrapped in a mystery, hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses. He was the kind of guy who could make you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room, while simultaneously not paying any attention to you at all. His social awkwardness was legendary, but it only added to his mystique. He was both outsider and insider, a contradiction in a city that thrived on contradictions. Warhol's early years in New York were a testament to the power of persistence and the occasional bout of good fortune. From the smog-choked streets of Pittsburgh to the bustling avenues of Manhattan, he was a testament to the idea that sometimes the most extraordinary art comes from the most ordinary beginnings. And as he continued to sketch his way into the annals of art history, one thing became clear. Andy Warhol was not just another artist. He was a revolution waiting to happen, one soup can at a time. And so, with that tantalizing promise of artistic revolution simmering like soup on the back burner, we find ourselves in the early 1960s, a time when Andy Warhol was poised to do to the art world what rock and roll was doing to music, shake things up, amp the volume, and make the old guard clutch their pearls. Warhol had already established a foothold in New York's commercial art scene, but he had his sights set on something bigger. No more illustrating shoes or sketching perfume bottles. Warhol was ready to redefine art itself, one silk screen at a time. Enter the Campbell's soup cans. These 32 canvases, each portraying a different flavor, were more than just images of America's favorite pantry staple. They were a cultural statement served with a side of irony. Warhol debuted them in 1962 at the Ferris Gallery in Los Angeles, a city that was just beginning to embrace its own brand of pop culture. The show was a game-changer, a can-opener, if you will, exposing the art world to the concept that mundane consumer goods could be elevated to the level of fine art. Critics were both baffled and intrigued, asking themselves the existential question, is it art or is it lunch? The genius of Warhol's work lay in its simplicity and duplicity. He mirrored the mass production techniques of the very items he was painting. Each can was hand-painted to look machine-made, a sly nod to the industrial processes that were transforming American society, Here was a man who understood that the line between high art and low culture was as thin as a soup label. Warhol was challenging the notion that art had to be unique, suggesting instead that replication could be just as meaningful. It was pop art's equivalent of a mic drop. Financially, Warhol's timing couldn't have been better. The post-war economic boom had left Americans with extra cash to spend and a burgeoning consumer culture to indulge. By the early 1960s, the average American income was around $5,600 a year, enough to buy a house, a car, and a pantry full of Campbell's soup, which cost a mere 10 cents a can. Warhol tapped into this zeitgeist, recognizing that consumer goods were the new cultural icons, and he wasn't shy about cashing in on that insight. As Warhol's star rose, so did his fascination with celebrities, the human equivalent of consumer products. He began producing iconic portraits of stars like Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley, turning their faces into commodities as recognizable as any brand logo. It was a period when Hollywood was at its glitziest, and Warhol was the unofficial court painter to the stars. His Marilyn diptych, a silkscreen painting created shortly after Monroe's death in 1962, captured her haunting allure while also commenting on the ephemeral nature of fame. It was art imitating life, imitating art. Warhol's public persona was as meticulously crafted as his art. He cultivated an image of aloofness and mystery rarely seen without his trademark sunglasses and silver wigs. The man could have taught poker-facedness to a stone statue. But behind that enigmatic exterior was a complex individual who understood that playing dumb was sometimes the smartest move in the room. People mistook his deadpan demeanor for lack of depth, when in fact it was a well-honed act that allowed him to navigate the celebrity-fueled art scene with ease. There was, however, a stark contrast between Warhol's public life and his private reality. While he mingled with the glitterati at Studio 54, his private life was marked by introversion and workaholism. The factory, his famous studio, was not just a place of creation, but also a refuge from the chaos of fame. It was the epicenter of pop art, a place where art, commerce, and celebrity collided in a haze of creativity and, occasionally, questionable substances. Warhol's approach to art was both revolutionary and pragmatic. He understood that in a world obsessed with image, the artist could be as much a brand as the art itself. This savvy understanding of the marketplace allowed him to bridge the gap between commercial success and artistic legitimacy. He wasn't just selling art, he was selling Andy Warhol, a product as carefully packaged and marketed as any soup can. Yet, for all his success, Warhol remained an enigma. His work questioned the very nature of art, identity, and celebrity, leaving audiences both captivated and confused. Some critics dismissed his work as superficial, while others hailed him as a genius who had redefined the art world. What was clear, however, was that Warhol had tapped into something profound about the American experience, capturing its contradictions and complexities with a sardonic smile. As the 1960s progressed, Warhol's influence only grew, shaping the pop art movement and redefining what it meant to be an artist in the modern age. He blurred the lines between art and life, creating a new cultural landscape where everything was a potential canvas. His rise to fame was not just a personal triumph, but a reflection of a society in flux, grappling with its own identity in a rapidly changing world. Warhol was both a product of his time and a visionary ahead of it, a man who saw art in the everyday and found beauty in the banal. And so, as we leave Andy in the swinging 60s, poised on the brink of even greater fame and fortune, remember this. He wasn't just painting soup cans, he was painting the future. The story of Andy Warhol is far from over, and like any good serialized drama, there's plenty more to come. Keep your eyes peeled and your soup cans stacked, this revolution is just getting started. The revolution, folks, was indeed just getting started, and it was about to find its gritty epicenter in a loft on East 47th Street. Welcome to the factory, a place that would become as legendary as the man who created it. Warhol didn't just open a studio, he opened Pandora's box for the avant-garde. In 1962, he leased this modest space, and by modest, I mean it was a former hat factory, because if you're going to reinvent art, why not start in a place that once churned out fedoras? The factory quickly became a magnet for the weird, the wonderful, and the downright eccentric. It was the kind of place where you could trip over a boa constrictor on your way to the snack table, and yes, that actually happened once. The cast of characters was as varied as the art they produced: musicians, druggies, drag queens, and bohemians, all mingling under one aluminum foil-wrapped roof. Warhol loved silver, and he decorated the factory with it, creating a space that looked like a cross between a spaceship and a pop-culture cathedral. But let's not get too caught up in the glitz. The factory was as much about business as it was about art. Warhol had a knack for blending these worlds, treating his studio like an assembly line. He churned out art with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker, only faster and with more glitter. Here's where the myth meets reality. Warhol wasn't just a lone genius at work, he was a shrewd entrepreneur. He saw the art world as a market ripe for disruption, and he was the Steve Jobs of screen printing. In the 1960s, the economics of art was shifting. The global art market was beginning to boom, with sales skyrocketing from 30 million in the 1950s to a staggering 200 million by the end of the 60s. Warhol was at the forefront of this boom, and he knew how to capitalize on it. He realized that by mass-producing art, he could democratize it, making it accessible to anyone with a few $100s to spare. His pieces sold for prices that range from $100 to $1,500 pocket change, compared to the astronomical sums they fetch today. Warhol's assembly line approach wasn't just a gimmick, it was a revolution. He believed that art didn't have to be a singular, unique creation. Instead, it could be reproduced, just like the consumer goods that flooded American homes. This was a radical idea, and it pissed off more than a few critics who clung to the notion that art should be one of a kind. But Warhol wasn't concerned with tradition, he was concerned with impact. The factory was also a hub of experimentation, not just with art, but with life itself. It was a place where societal norms were challenged and sometimes shattered. The artists and hangers-on didn't just create art, they lived it. They were walking, talking works of performance art, existing in a space that blurred the lines between reality and theatre. Warhol's entourage included the likes of Edie Sedgwick, a socialite turned superstar, whose tragic life would become a cautionary tale about the perils of fame. There was also Lou Reed, whose band, the Velvet Underground, provided the factory's soundtrack, a gritty electric mix that echoed the chaos of the times. For all its hedonistic allure, the factory had its share of darkness. It was not just a playground for the artistic elite, but also a battleground for personal demons. The drugs flowed as freely as the creativity, and not everyone survived the ride. Warhol himself was no stranger to danger. In 1968, he was shot by Valerie Solanas, a radical feminist who had appeared in one of his films. Warhol survived, but the incident left him with physical and emotional scars that never fully healed. The factory's reputation was mythologized, and rightly so. It was both a utopia and a dystopia, depending on who you asked. To some, it was a place of liberation, where you could reinvent yourself with every brushstroke. To others, it was a den of excess, where reality was suspended and nothing was quite what it seemed. Warhol thrived in this environment, understanding that the chaos was part of the creative process. He once said, "I never think that people die. They just go to department stores." It's a line that captures his peculiar blend of humor and detachment, a reminder that in Warhol's world, life and art were inseparable. Yet, for all its glamour and grit, the factory was also a business venture. Warhol was not just creating art, he was creating a brand. He knew that in the age of mass media, image was everything. By the late 60s, he was selling prints and paintings faster than you could say 15 minutes of fame. His work was in high demand, and he was more than happy to meet it. The factory operated like a well-oiled machine, with assistants working round the clock to produce Warhol's pieces. This was art as industry, and Warhol was its CEO. In many ways, the factory was a microcosm of the cultural upheaval of the 1960s. It was a place where boundaries were blurred and conventions were challenged. Warhol's genius lay in his ability to harness this energy and channel it into his work. He wasn't just producing art, he was producing a cultural movement. The factory was a laboratory for ideas, a place where the future was being shaped, one silkscreen at a time. As the 1960s drew to a close, the factory's influence was undeniable. It had become a symbol of the pop art movement and a testament to Warhol's vision. The studio's legacy would continue to reverberate through the art world, influencing generations of artists to come. But for Warhol, the journey was far from over. He would continue to push the boundaries of art and commerce, forever changing the way we think about creativity. So, as we leave the factory behind, remember this: it wasn't just a place, it was a phenomenon. Warhol had turned art into a spectacle, a business, and a way of life. And in doing so, he had redefined what it meant to be an artist in the modern world. The revolution was still in full swing, and Warhol was leading the charge. Stay tuned, because there's more to come in this ever-evolving saga of art, fame, and the American dream. As the 1960s faded into the hazy glow of memory, Andy Warhol found himself standing at the precipice of yet another cultural shift. The world was changing, and Warhol, ever the chameleon, was ready to evolve with it. The 1970s and 1980s were a new frontier, and Andy was about to navigate them with the same audacious flair that had defined his earlier career. If the 60s were about breaking into the art world, the next 2 decades were about breaking out of it entirely, as Warhol took his place not just as a painter, but as a cultural impresario. Let's start with Warhol's cinematic adventures. It wasn't enough for him to redefine art, he wanted to take a swing at cinema too. In the early 70s, Warhol's films were the visual equivalent of a Dadaist prank, subversive, bewildering, and often downright confusing. You'd sit through hours of footage where nothing seemed to happen, like watching paint dry, only the paint was a metaphor for existential ennui. But in those seemingly mundane frames lay the seeds of modern-day reality TV. Warhol's Empire, an 8-hour static shot of the Empire State Building, dared audiences to reconsider what constituted entertainment. It was less of a film and more of a meditation, if your idea of meditation involves a lot of fidgeting and the occasional nap. His foray into film wasn't just a vanity project, it was a business venture, albeit one that made Hollywood nervous. Warhol wasn't about to play by Tinseltown's rules. His films, often featuring factory regulars, shunned traditional narratives, opting instead for the raw, unfiltered chaos of real life. They were art house flicks on steroids, and they attracted a cult following of cinephiles who appreciated Warhol's disdain for the conventional. The films were low-budget affairs. Warhol once said, "I think everybody should be a machine," and his approach to filmmaking reflected that. With minimal resources, he churned out films like Chelsea Girls, a 1966 split-screen experiment that became an underground sensation, grossing over $500,000, a tidy sum for a film made on a shoestring budget. But Warhol wasn't content to stop at films. No, he had his eyes on the burgeoning world of music, a scene ripe with the kind of rebellious energy that fueled his creative fires. Enter the Velvet Underground, a band that Warhol managed to mold into the musical extension of his artistic vision. Lou Reed and Company weren't exactly topping the charts, but their sound, a mix of avant-garde noise and gritty rock, was the perfect backdrop for Warhol's multimedia performances, known as the exploding plastic inevitable. Think of it as a live-action acid trip, with strobe lights, dancers, and music so loud it could make your eardrums file for divorce. It was a spectacle that left audiences both exhilarated and slightly traumatized. The Velvets, under Warhol's wing, became the house band for the factory's mythic parties, and their debut album, The Velvet Underground and Nico, featured a Warhol-designed banana on the cover. It was a marriage of sound and image that would inspire countless musicians and artists. The album's initial sales were modest at best, selling around 30,000 copies in its first 5 years, but its influence was seismic. Brian Eno famously quipped, "The first Velvet Underground album only sold 10,000 copies, but everyone who bought it formed a band." Warhol had, once again, tapped into a cultural vein, proving that his touch extended beyond the canvas and into the realms of sound. Meanwhile, in the world of publishing, Warhol was busy redefining what a magazine could be. In 1969, he launched Interview, a publication that would become the glossy Bible of celebrity culture. It was dubbed The Crystal Ball of Pop, a fitting title for a magazine that captured the zeitgeist with uncanny precision. Warhol understood that America was infatuated with fame, and Interview was his love letter to that obsession. The magazine featured intimate conversations with the stars of the day, often conducted by Warhol himself, who had a knack for coaxing out the most candid admissions from his subjects. It was a magazine that blurred the line between journalism and art, much like Warhol's entire career. Interview wasn't just about the interviews, though. It was a visual feast, Warhol's artistic sensibilities permeated every page, creating a magazine that was as much about the aesthetic as the content. The publication became a platform for up-and-coming photographers and artists, a place where the next generation of creative minds could showcase their work. In true Warhol fashion, the magazine was both a commercial success and a cultural touchstone, proving that the man who turned soup cans into art could also turn print media into a spectacle. Warhol's genius lay in his ability to see connections where others saw none. He understood that the world was becoming a web of interconnected cultures, and he positioned himself at the center of it. His collaborations were legendary, from working with Jean-Michel Basquiat, an up-and-coming street artist who shared Warhol's disdain for the traditional art world, to teaming up with fashion designers like Yves Saint Laurent. Warhol was a master of reinvention, a fact that allowed him to remain relevant even as the world around him changed at breakneck speed. In the 1980s, Warhol's art took on a new dimension. He began incorporating modern technology into his work, using computers and video to explore new artistic possibilities. It was a natural progression for a man who had always been fascinated by the intersection of art and technology. He even ventured into television, hosting Andy Warhol's TV, a show that was as eclectic and unpredictable as its creator. The show featured interviews with everyone from Debbie Harry to John Oates, a testament to Warhol's enduring fascination with celebrity. It was a precursor to the kind of variety programming that would later dominate cable television, and it showcased Warhol's ability to adapt to new media with ease. Warhol's impact on the art world and popular culture was profound and far-reaching. He blurred the boundaries between high art and popular culture, challenging the conventions that sought to separate them. In doing so, he created a new language of art, one that spoke to the realities of a consumer-driven society. His work was a reflection of the times, a mirror held up to a world that was both fascinated and repulsed by its own reflection. As the 1980s progressed, Warhol's influence only grew. He remained a fixture in the art world, a charismatic enigma whose presence was as compelling as his work. He was a man who understood that art was not just about creation, but about conversation. Warhol's legacy was one of constant dialogue, a never-ending conversation between artist and audience, between past and future. So, as we leave Warhol in the midst of his 1980s renaissance, remember this: he wasn't just an artist, he was a cultural architect. He built bridges between worlds that seemed irreconcilable, creating a tapestry of art, commerce, and celebrity that continues to resonate today. Warhol's story is far from over, and as we move toward the conclusion of this saga, keep in mind that the revolution he sparked is still unfolding, one frame, one note, one page at a time. Stay tuned for the final act. It's bound to be a masterpiece. And so, as we set the stage for the final act of Andy Warhol's life, let's remember that the curtain never truly falls on a legacy like his. It merely shifts to a different stage. Warhol passed away on February 22, 1987, following gallbladder surgery, leaving behind a world forever altered by his Technicolor touch. The irony? The man who made a career out of defying expectations succumbed to complications from what should have been a routine procedure. But if life is art and art is life, then Warhol's exit was just another enigmatic brushstroke on his vast canvas. Posthumously, Warhol's reputation became the stuff of legend, but legends have a pesky way of distorting reality. Let's debunk a few myths, shall we? First up, the notion that Warhol was a shallow artist obsessed solely with fame and fortune. Sure, he had a knack for turning everyday objects into cultural icons, but to dismiss his work as superficial is to miss the point entirely. Warhol's art was a critique of the very society that idolized him, an institution that equated consumerism with identity. In his hands, a Campbell's soup can wasn't just a can, it was a commentary on the commodification of culture. And yes, he made a pretty penny doing it, but let's not pretend the art world wasn't already a commercial enterprise. After all, what is the Louvre if not a high-end showroom with a gift shop? Then there's the myth of Warhol, the recluse, hiding behind his dark glasses and silver wigs. While his public persona was as carefully curated as his art, Warhol was hardly a hermit. He was a social butterfly, flitting from one glittering event to another, his presence a currency in the world of celebrity. But behind the facade was a man deeply fascinated by the human condition, a subject he explored with unflinching honesty in his work. His portraits captured more than just the faces of the famous. They were mirrors reflecting the ephemeral nature of fame itself. Warhol's influence on contemporary art and media is as pervasive as it is profound. Consider the rise of appropriation art, a movement that Warhol arguably pioneered with his silk screens of Brillo boxes and Coca-Cola bottles. Artists like Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst owe a debt to Warhol's vision, their works a testament to his enduring legacy. The idea that art can be both a commercial product and a profound statement is now a given, but it was Warhol who first blurred those lines with a wink and a nod. His impact extends beyond the art world, infiltrating the realms of fashion, music, and even technology. Warhol's collaborations with designers and musicians broke down barriers between disciplines, paving the way for today's multimedia artists. In a world where Instagram influencers are the new celebrities, Warhol's prescient observation that, in the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes feels less like a prediction and more like a self-fulfilling prophecy. He understood the power of image in a way that was ahead of its time, and his work continues to resonate in our visually driven culture. Warhol also challenged the notion of the artist as a solitary genius. His factory was a melting pot of creativity, a place where collaboration was key. This collective approach to art-making has become a hallmark of modern practice, as artists seek to engage with a broader community. Warhol's willingness to embrace new technologies, from screen printing to television, set a precedent for today's digital artists, who navigate the virtual world with the same curiosity and audacity that Warhol applied to the canvas. But perhaps Warhol's most significant contribution to art history is his ability to provoke thought and challenge perceptions. His work forces us to question the value we place on art, the nature of celebrity, and the role of the artist in society. He was a master of subversion, using irony and satire to expose the absurdities of modern life. In a world that often takes itself too seriously, Warhol's art is a reminder that sometimes the most profound statements are made with a sense of humor. So, as we wrap up this tale of soup cans and superstars, let's consider what Warhol's life and work teach us about the human experience. He showed us that art could be found in the most unexpected places, that beauty lurks in the banal, and that even the most mundane objects can hold profound meaning. His legacy is a testament to the power of creativity, to transcend boundaries, to challenge conventions, and to inspire change. As we close the book on Andy Warhol, it's clear that his story is far from over. His influence continues to ripple through the worlds of art and culture, a reminder that true innovation never fades. Warhol once said, "Art is what you can get away with," and in getting away with so much, he left us a roadmap for how to navigate our own creative journeys. So, let's take a page from Warhol's book, keep our eyes open, our minds curious, and embrace the chaos with a knowing smile. After all, in the world of Andy Warhol, the revolution is always in progress, and the future is just a canvas waiting to be filled. When Johannes Kepler arrived in this chaotic world in 1571, the Holy Roman Empire was the kind of place where cosmic mysteries had to compete with earthly squabbles for attention. Born premature, Kepler himself joked that his entrance into the universe was a bit of a surprise, much like his eventual career in astronomy. It's as if the stars nudged him out early, whispering, "Hey kid, there's a cosmos out there waiting for you." Now, the Empire wasn't exactly a hotspot for cutting-edge science. It was more like a medieval reality show, where every principality, duchy, and bishopric was squabbling over power, land, and who had the fanciest hat. Amidst this chaos, Kepler's family wasn't exactly rolling in florins. His dad was a mercenary, a profession with the job security of a reality TV star, and his mom dabbled in herbal medicine, which, back then, was a polite way of saying she was occasionally accused of witchcraft. Imagine growing up with that family dynamic. Kepler was a sickly kid, which meant he didn't spend his early years frolicking in fields or learning to swing a sword. Instead, he found solace in books and the night sky. By 1589, Kepler trotted off to the University of Tübingen, thinking he might become a Lutheran preacher. Yes, little Johannes was set on spreading the good word, but destiny had other plans. Enter Michael Maestlin, Tübingen's star professor and a staunch supporter of the heliocentric model, an idea that was about as popular among the ecclesiastical elites as a fox in a henhouse. Maestlin introduced Kepler to the revolutionary ideas of Copernicus, who dared to suggest that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Instead, it was just another planet orbiting the Sun, making Earth the cosmic equivalent of a middle child. This heliocentric model was radical, especially when the Church had a pretty sweet setup with the geocentric model where everything literally revolved around them. But Kepler, with his insatiable curiosity and perhaps a touch of rebellious spirit, was hooked. Kepler wasn't just starry-eyed about the cosmos, he had a knack for mathematical precision. He started scribbling away, mixing Copernican ideas with his own theories, like a Renaissance era DJ remixing tracks. He even managed to impress the academic bigwigs enough to earn his master's degree in 1591. Not too shabby for a guy who entered this world without a full set of lungs. Despite his academic prowess, Kepler was a bit of an oddball. He had a peculiar sense of humour and a tendency to say things that made people wonder if he'd spent a little too much time staring at the sun. He once quipped that if he hadn't been born prematurely, he might have ended up as something as mundane as a shoemaker. Instead, he was the universe's reluctant chosen one, destined to unravel its mysteries. By the late 1590s, Kepler was neck-deep in the astronomical debates of his time. Was the Earth the centre of everything, or was it just another cog in the celestial machine? The stakes were high. Getting it wrong wasn't just a blow to scientific pride, it could mean a cosy date with the Inquisition. But Kepler, with his oddball humour and relentless curiosity, was undeterred. His academic mentor, Maestlin, was a big influence, but Kepler was never one to follow blindly. He took Maestlin's heliocentric teachings and ran with them, eventually developing his own theories that would make Copernicus look like a warm-up act. Kepler was like the cosmic Sherlock, poring over data, making observations, and connecting dots no one else could see. Kepler's early life was a blend of cosmic curiosity and earthly chaos, with a dash of humour that saw him through the tough times. It's a testament to his spirit that he didn't just survive these challenges. He thrived, setting the stage for a career that would change our understanding of the universe forever. So buckle up, because this is just the beginning of Kepler's astronomical adventure. Kepler's tale takes a sharp turn in Graz, where he cooked up what he boldly called his cosmic mystery, a model of the universe that was as ambitious as it was mind-bending. In 1596, Kepler published Mysterium Cosmographicum, a work that attempted to explain the orbits of the planets using the 5 Platonic solids. Now, if your geometry is a little rusty, these are those funky three-dimensional shapes that look like someone got a little too creative with their dice set. Kepler's idea was that the distances between the planets could be explained by these solids nested within each other like celestial Russian dolls. It was a theory that made the academic world sit up and take notice, or at least scratch their heads in confusion. But why Graz, you ask? Well, Kepler had landed a gig teaching mathematics at a Protestant school there. It wasn't exactly the centre of the universe, but for a budding astronomer, it was a paycheck. Graz was a city caught in the crossfire of religious upheaval. Protestant and Catholic tensions were as thick as the Styrian fog. The Counter-Reformation was in full swing, and the political climate was as unstable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Kepler, being a Protestant, was about as popular as a cat at a dog show. Despite the tension, Kepler's cosmic mystery caught the eye of Tycho Brahe, Denmark's most flamboyant astronomer, known for his accurate observations and an impressive collection of data. Brahe was as eccentric as they come. He had a pet elk that reportedly drank itself to death, and he sported a prosthetic nose made of brass after losing his real one in a duel. If there was ever a real-life mashup of Bill Nye and Captain Jack Sparrow, Brahe was it. By 1600, the political squeeze in Graz had turned into a full-on bear hug. Kepler, along with other Protestants, was given an ultimatum: convert to Catholicism or get out of Dodge. Kepler chose option B, packing up his cosmic mystery and heading to Prague, where Tycho Brahe had set up shop under the patronage of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II. It was here that Kepler and Brahe became the original odd couple of astronomy. Kepler was the quintessential data-crunching introvert, a man who preferred the company of numbers to people. Brahe, on the other hand, was the life of the astronomical party, complete with lavish feasts and a penchant for drama. Imagine putting Sheldon Cooper and Tony Stark in a room together and asking them to solve the mysteries of the universe. The comedic potential was astronomical, but so was the scientific output. Their partnership was rocky from the start. Brahe, protective of his life's work, was reluctant to share his data with Kepler, who needed it to prove his theories. It was the 17th century equivalent of handing over the keys to the Batmobile. But Kepler was persistent, and after much negotiation got his hands on Brahe's precious observations. This was no small feat, given that Brahe's data included 20 years of meticulous observations of the planet's positions, recorded without the aid of a telescope, because the telescope hadn't been invented yet. Talk about patience. The duo's collaboration was a game of astronomical chess, with Brahe's data providing the board and Kepler's mathematical genius moving the pieces. Kepler's task was to make sense of the planetary orbits, which refused to behave in neat circles, as was the popular belief. It was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, but Kepler, ever the cosmic detective, discovered that the answer lay in ellipses, not circles. This was a revelation that would eventually lead to Kepler's laws of planetary motion, but for now it was just a glimmer of insight. Their working relationship was as turbulent as the stars they studied. Brahe, with his golden nose and noble connections, was used to being the centre of attention. Kepler, with his penchant for solitude and meticulous calculations, was the antithesis of Brahe's flamboyance. Yet their disparate energies created a synergy that pushed the boundaries of astronomy. It was a classic case of opposites attracting, at least in the scientific sense. In 1601, the universe threw a curveball when Brahe died unexpectedly, reportedly from a urinary infection, after refusing to leave a banquet because it would be impolite. In a twist that could only be described as cosmic irony, Kepler was named his successor as imperial mathematician. With Brahe's data finally in his hands and no one to hold him back, Kepler was ready to take his own theories to the next level. Kepler's time in Graz and his partnership with Brahe were pivotal chapters in his life's work. They were years of struggle, discovery, and, yes, a bit of cosmic comedy. Kepler was a man of contradictions, an introverted astronomer with a flair for dramatic ideas, a Protestant in a Catholic world, a scientist driven by a sense of divine order. His journey from Graz to Prague was more than just a change of scenery. It was a leap into a new era of scientific thought, setting the stage for the breakthroughs that would come next. But hold on to your telescopes, because Kepler's adventure is far from over. With Brahe's flamboyant boots now permanently retired, Kepler found himself in the astronomical driver's seat, holding a treasure trove of data that was the 17th century equivalent of a winning lottery ticket. But don't be fooled. This wasn't a simple case of collecting his prize. It was more like inheriting a massive jigsaw puzzle with all the pieces scattered across the cosmos, some of them missing, and no picture on the box to guide him. Kepler, ever the intrepid cosmic detective, rolled up his sleeves and prepared to dive into Brahe's meticulous observations. These weren't your run-of-the-mill star charts. They were the most precise measurements of planetary positions available at the time, all meticulously recorded to within a fraction of a degree. Brahe had spent decades compiling this data, and now it was up to Kepler to make sense of it all. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of Kepler's discoveries, let's set the scene. Picture early 17th century Prague, a city teetering on the edge of the Renaissance and the modern scientific era. The Holy Roman Empire was a patchwork of territories with a penchant for political drama that would make a soap opera blush. Kepler, now the imperial mathematician, was tasked with turning Brahe's raw data into something that could explain the celestial ballet of the heavens. Kepler faced the astronomical task of solving the celestial enigma that had stumped scholars for centuries, the motion of the planets. Remember, at the time, the prevailing belief was that the planets moved in perfect circles, as proposed by the ancient Greeks. This idea was as deeply ingrained as the notion that the Earth was flat during the Middle Ages. Another myth, by the way. Most educated people knew it was round. But Kepler, with his penchant for questioning the status quo, wasn't convinced. Cue the first of Kepler's groundbreaking laws of planetary motion, which he unveiled in his 69 opus Astronomia Nova, a title that translates to The New Astronomy, fitting for the seismic shift it would bring. The first law, known as the law of ellipses, was a game-changer. Kepler proposed that planets didn't move in perfect circles, but rather in ellipses, with the Sun at one of the two foci. This was a cosmic curveball that defied centuries of astronomical orthodoxy. Imagine the shockwaves this sent through the astronomical community. It was like telling a room full of flat-earthers that the Earth was actually a globe. Kepler's elliptical orbits meant that planets sped up and slowed down as they moved closer to and farther from the Sun, defying the circular uniformity that had been gospel for centuries. And while this might sound like a simple adjustment to us today, back then it was akin to proposing that the Earth revolved around a giant spaghetti monster. Kepler's second law, the law of equal areas, further compounded the confusion. It stated that a line segment joining a planet and the Sun sweeps out equal areas during equal intervals of time. In layman's terms, this meant that planets travel faster when they're closer to the Sun and slower when they're farther away. This was a revolutionary insight into the mechanics of planetary motion, challenging the notion of uniform circular speed that had been the bread and butter of astronomers for eons. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic image of Kepler as the lone genius cracking the cosmic code. The reality was far messier and involved more than a few moments of self-doubt and frustration. Kepler's diary entries reveal an astronomer who often questioned his own sanity and abilities. He was plagued by moments of insecurity, once writing, "I feel as if I were cast into the open sea, where I must swim for my life." Not exactly the words of someone who confidently strides into the pages of history, but they do speak to the relentless perseverance that drove him to keep pushing forward. Kepler's discoveries didn't just challenge scientific principles, they also had economic implications. Navigation and calendar systems relied heavily on accurate astronomical models, and Kepler's laws offered a more precise understanding of planetary motion, which would eventually aid European navigation and trade. In a world where sea voyages could make or break empires, Kepler's work had the potential to shift the balance of power, albeit indirectly. Kepler's contemporaries were a mixed bag of disbelief and intrigue. Some hailed him as a visionary, while others dismissed his ideas as the ramblings of a man who'd spent a little too much time staring at the stars. Kepler himself was acutely aware of the challenges his theories posed to traditional thinking. He once lamented, "I am stealing the golden vessels of the Egyptians," likening his work to the biblical story of Moses, who took the treasures of Egypt to build something new and divine. In the face of skepticism and resistance, Kepler remained undeterred. He was like a cosmic sculptor, chiseling away at the marble of celestial mechanics to reveal the elegant form beneath. His elliptical orbits and equal area law were just the beginning, paving the way for a new understanding of the universe that would revolutionize astronomy and lay the groundwork for Newton's laws of gravitation. But as Kepler stood on the precipice of scientific revolution, the world around him was anything but stable. The 30 Years' War loomed on the horizon, a conflict that would ravage Europe and upend the political and social order. In this chaotic backdrop, Kepler's work was a beacon of reason and progress, even as the world seemed to teeter on the brink of chaos. So, as Kepler navigated the turbulent waters of scientific discovery and religious intolerance, he stood as a testament to the power of human curiosity and resilience. His journey wasn't just about the stars. It was about challenging the limits of knowledge and daring to dream of a universe governed by laws yet unseen. And while his story is far from over, the legacy of his early discoveries continues to resonate, reminding us that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple question, what if? Kepler, ever the celestial explorer, found himself swept up in the whirlwind of history, juggling cosmic revelations and earthly trials with a dexterity that would make any juggler envious. His move to Linz in 1612 wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a bold leap into a world even more turbulent than the planetary orbits he was deciphering. Linz, a city nestled along the Danube, offered Kepler a fresh start away from the political chaos of Prague. But, of course, the cosmos wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. Linz was a city where the 30 Years' War was as much a part of the landscape as the river itself. This was a conflict that churned across Europe from 1618 to 1648. A 30-year-long brawl involving a cast of characters that would make a Shakespearean drama look like a Sunday picnic. The war was a tangled mess of religious, political, and territorial disputes, and it had the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. Economic hardships were the order of the day, and Kepler found himself navigating these troubled waters while trying to keep his astronomical dreams afloat. In the midst of this chaos, in 1609, Kepler dropped his magnum opus, Harmonices Mundi, or The Harmony of the World. Now, if you're imagining Kepler as a 17th century Beethoven conducting a cosmic orchestra, you're not far off. This was where he unveiled his third law of planetary motion, a discovery that linked the periods of planets' orbits with their distances from the Sun in a harmonious mathematical relationship. To Kepler, this was more than just numbers. It was a cosmic symphony only he seemed to hear, a universal melody that infused the heavens with order and elegance. Kepler's third law stated that the square of a planet's orbital period is proportional to the cube of the semi-major axis of its orbit. In simpler terms, if you know how far a planet is from the Sun, you can predict how long it takes to complete an orbit. This was a revelation that tied the celestial dance together in a way that made astrologers and astronomers alike sit up and take notice. It was as if Kepler had discovered the sheet music to the universe, a symphony where each planet played its part in perfect harmony. But hold your applause. Kepler's life was far from a harmonious sonata. In an era where religious tensions were as explosive as a powder keg, Kepler's Protestant beliefs made him a target. His mother, Katharina, found herself accused of witchcraft, a charge that could have easily ended with a one-way ticket to the stake. The witch trials were the Salem of their day, a terrifying reminder that reason often took a back seat to superstition. Katharina's trial was a grim affair, stretching on for 6 years from 1615 to 1621. The charges were as flimsy as a house of cards, based on rumours and hysteria that would make a tabloid headline blush. Kepler, ever the devoted son, took up her defence with the same tenacity he applied to his astronomical pursuits. He penned letters and legal defences, using logic and reason to combat the absurdities of the accusations. It was a battle of wits against the forces of ignorance, and in 1621 Katharina was finally acquitted. The ordeal, however, left deep scars, a testament to the dark side of human nature that could overshadow even the brightest of intellectual achievements. Through it all, Kepler maintained a sense of humour that was as dry as a desert and as sharp as a comet's tail. His correspondence from this period is peppered with wry observations and sardonic commentary. Despite the madness swirling around him, Kepler found solace in the stars, a reminder that the universe, in all its vastness, was governed by laws of harmony and balance. He once quipped, "Nature uses as little as possible of anything," a succinct summary of the elegance he perceived in the cosmos. Kepler's work wasn't just theoretical musings, it had practical implications that would ripple through the scientific community for generations. His laws of planetary motion laid the groundwork for Isaac Newton's theory of gravitation, a discovery that would forever change our understanding of the universe. Kepler's mathematical insights provided the foundation upon which Newton would build his laws of motion and universal gravitation. It was a scientific relay race where Kepler passed the baton to Newton, setting the stage for the Enlightenment and the dawn of modern science. But Kepler's life was a constant balancing act between his celestial pursuits and the harsh realities of 17th century life. Economic hardships were a persistent thorn in his side. His salary as an imperial mathematician was often delayed or unpaid, a common plight for many scholars of the time. In letters he bemoaned his financial woes, revealing a man who, despite his cosmic achievements, struggled with the same mundane concerns as anyone else. Yet, even in the face of adversity, Kepler's spirit remained unbroken. His life was a testament to the power of perseverance, a reminder that even when the world seems to conspire against you, the pursuit of knowledge can be a guiding light. Kepler's journey from Linz to the stars was more than just a personal triumph. It was a beacon of hope in an age of darkness, a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity. As Kepler penned his observations and calculated his equations, he was laying the cornerstone for future scientific revolutions. His work was a bridge between the medieval and modern worlds, a testament to the transformative power of science to transcend the chaos of its time. Kepler's legacy wasn't just the laws of motion. It was the idea that the universe is knowable, a symphony waiting to be heard by those willing to listen. And so, as we leave Kepler in Linz, grappling with the chaos of his world while deciphering the symphony of the cosmos, we see a man whose story is far from over. The world around him may have been fraught with turmoil, but Kepler's vision of a universe governed by harmony and order was a lighthouse in the storm, guiding future generations toward the promise of discovery. The adventure continues, with Kepler poised on the brink of even greater revelations, forever curious, forever questioning, forever listening to the music of the spheres. As we pick up from Kepler's cosmic journey, we find ourselves approaching the final act of a life that was as tumultuous as it was groundbreaking. By 1630, Kepler's star, both literally and figuratively, was shining brighter than ever. He had spent years navigating the turbulent waters of 17th-century Europe, where religious wars and political upheaval were as common as the stars in the sky. But through it all, he remained steadfast, a beacon of scientific inquiry in an age where reason often took a back seat to conflict and superstition. Kepler's discoveries had already begun to ripple through the scientific community, challenging the long-held geocentric views and inspiring a new generation of astronomers to look beyond the dogma of their day. His 3 laws of planetary motion didn't just explain how planets moved, they opened the door to a universe governed by mathematical precision, a cosmos where the stars danced to a rhythm that could be understood by those willing to listen. The man was nothing if not prolific. Among the jewels of his legacy was the Rudolphine Tables, a set of astronomical tables published in 1627. Named after his former patron, Emperor Rudolph II, these tables were a monumental achievement, correcting and refining the work of his predecessors with a level of accuracy that was unprecedented. They took decades to compile, but when they finally hit the shelves, they were the talk of the astronomical town. They provided the most precise predictions of planetary positions to date, making them an indispensable tool for navigation. A big deal in an era when getting lost at sea wasn't just inconvenient, it was often fatal. Kepler's tables were the 17th century equivalent of Google Maps for the stars, and they cemented his reputation as one of the greatest astronomers of his time. They were used to predict the transit of Mercury in 1631, a celestial event that further validated his laws of planetary motion. It was a moment of triumph, a cosmic mic drop that silenced the skeptics and solidified his place in the annals of scientific history. But let's not get carried away with the romantic image of Kepler as the lone genius, tirelessly working under the night sky. The reality was far messier and involved more than a few setbacks and frustrations. Kepler struggled with financial woes throughout his career, often writing to patrons and creditors with the desperation of a man who knew that his next meal depended on their generosity. His salary as an imperial mathematician was frequently delayed or unpaid, a harsh reminder that even the brightest minds were not immune to the economic hardships of their time. Despite these challenges, Kepler found humor in his struggles. He once quipped that his life was like a comet, a celestial body that flares brightly for a time before fading into the darkness. This self-deprecating humor was a hallmark of Kepler's personality, a coping mechanism that allowed him to navigate the absurdities of his world with a wry smile. Kepler's story is often painted as the tale of a solitary genius, but this myth overlooks the vibrant network of friends, correspondents, and collaborators who played a crucial role in his work. He was part of a community of thinkers and dreamers, a network of minds that stretched across Europe, bound together by a shared passion for discovery. They exchanged ideas and observations, debated theories, and supported one another in their quest for knowledge. Kepler wasn't a lone wolf, he was part of a pack, a collective that pushed the boundaries of science and shaped the course of history. By the time of his death in Regensburg in 1630, Kepler had laid the groundwork for a scientific revolution that would sweep across Europe and change the world forever. His work paved the way for Isaac Newton, who would go on to develop the laws of motion and universal gravitation, building on the foundations that Kepler had established. Newton famously said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And Kepler was indeed one of those giants, a visionary who dared to look beyond the stars and into the mathematical heart of the universe. In the years following Kepler's death, his ideas gradually gained acceptance, overcoming the skepticism and resistance that had once greeted them. The world was slowly waking up to the realization that the cosmos was far more complex and wondrous than they had ever imagined. Kepler's laws became the bedrock of celestial mechanics, a testament to the enduring power of his insights and the legacy of a man who refused to accept the limits of his time. Kepler's influence transcends the realm of science, echoing through the corridors of culture and philosophy. His work challenged humanity to reimagine its place in the universe, to see itself not as the center of creation, but as a part of a grand, interconnected tapestry. This shift in perspective was nothing short of revolutionary, a catalyst for the Enlightenment and the age of reason that would follow. In debunking the myth of the lonely genius, we find a man who, despite life's absurdities, found humor and meaning in the stars. Kepler's story is a reminder that sometimes the universe's best jokes are written in math, and the punchlines are found in the harmony of the spheres. His legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth. And as we look to the stars today, we do so standing on the shoulders of a man who dared to ask, what if? So here's to Johannes Kepler, the cosmic detective, the reluctant hero, the man who found order in the chaos of the universe, and left us a legacy that continues to guide our journey through the stars. As the night sky unfolds its celestial wonders, we remember Kepler as more than just a name in a history book. He was a pioneer who invited us to dream bigger, to reach further, and to never stop questioning the mysteries of the cosmos. The thing about Oskar Schindler is that he was as much a paradox as he was a person. Born in 1908 in what was then Austro-Hungarian territory, Schindler entered the world in Zwickau, a small town in Moravia that's now part of the Czech Republic. Picture a place where everyone knows everyone else's business, which in Schindler's case was more than a little colourful. His father, Hans Schindler, ran a successful farm machinery business, while his mother, Louisa, was the kind of pious that made even the church ladies raise their eyebrows. Young Oskar grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, or at least a moderately shiny one. But let's not pretend he was some angelic child destined for sainthood. No, Schindler was more of a charming rogue, the kind who'd probably talk his way out of detention with a smile and a well-timed compliment. He had a knack for wheeling and dealing that started early, managing to sell his father's farm equipment with a sales pitch that was heavier on charisma than technical details. By the time the tumultuous 1930s rolled around, Schindler had already dabbled in various business ventures. And by dabbled, I mean he dipped his toes into just about anything that promised a quick buck. He first tried his hand at managing a cheese factory, a venture that quickly soured. Then he moved on to selling electric appliances, which also didn't quite light up his bank account. But let's give him credit here. Schindler's failures were as spectacular as his successes were unexpected. And speaking of successes, there was that stint where he managed to sell second-hand cars. Now, in a decade where people were more concerned with affording bread than splurging on wheels, Schindler somehow managed to roll out of the dealership with his pockets a bit fuller. The man had a Midas touch, or maybe just a golden tongue, convincing people that life's too short not to have a little luxury, even if it meant skipping a few meals. Ah, luxury. Here's where Oskar truly shined, or rather, sparkled. He had a taste for the finer things in life, from fancy suits to expensive cars, and a knack for living beyond his means. You could say his financial strategy was less about saving and more about savouring. It was a lifestyle that left his accountant sweating bullets, but it also made him the life of the party, or at least the party's best-dressed guest. Of course, living large came at a cost. Schindler's bank account was as mercurial as his business ventures, one day flush, the next flat broke. But if there's one thing Schindler excelled at, it was embracing opportunity, or in some cases creating it out of thin air. Into the 1930s, a decade that might as well have been a Shakespearean tragedy. Economies were collapsing faster than you could say Great Depression, and Europe was a powder keg of political tension. Schindler, ever the opportunist, saw possibilities where others saw problems. The economic instability that sent many into despair was, for Schindler, a chance to try his hand at new ventures. What made Schindler tick was his ability to navigate these turbulent waters with a blend of bravado and instinct. He had an uncanny ability to read people, a skill that served him well in his later, more infamous endeavours. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. In the here and now of pre-war Czechoslovakia, Schindler was just another businessman trying to stay afloat in a sea of uncertainty. Despite his failures, or perhaps because of them, Schindler had a resilience that was as stubborn as it was admirable. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes success isn't about winning every time, but about bouncing back with style, even if that style involves a few too many expensive suits and a penchant for the dramatic. So, there he was, part Gatsby, part salesman, manoeuvring through the economic chaos of the 1930s with the kind of flair that made people simultaneously admire and question him. Little did anyone know that this larger-than-life figure would eventually leave a legacy that would change the course of history. But for now, He was just Oskar, trying to find his footing in a world that was about to change forever. As the world teetered on the brink of a hellish new chapter in the late 1930s, Oskar Schindler was sharpening his skills in the art of survival, a talent that would take him from the quagmires of business to the treacherous swamps of politics. With Europe marching to the beat of nationalism and extremism, Schindler saw an opportunity in the chaos. He wasn't about to let a little thing like morality stand in the way of a good opportunity, and so, in 1939, he joined the Nazi Party. Now, before you raise an eyebrow, let's remember that Schindler was less interested in ideology and more in the potential for personal gain. It was a move motivated by pragmatism rather than passion, a strategic choice rather than a moral alignment. Joining the Nazi Party was a bit like buying a ticket to the big league of opportunism. Schindler's decision was as much about survival in a rapidly changing political landscape as it was about ambition. He wasn't alone either. In 1938, the Nazi Party was growing faster than a rumor at a high school prom, with membership swelling to over 5 million. For Schindler, signing up was akin to acquiring a golden ticket, a chance to network with the who's who of the new regime. He wasn't exactly the poster child for Nazi ideals, but he knew how to play the game, and play it he did. Schindler's entry into this world was marked by a series of shrewd moves, the kind that would make even the most seasoned politician nod in approval. He cozied up to the Abwehr, the German military intelligence service, a group that valued his connections and his knack for getting things done. It was a symbiotic relationship. Schindler provided information and contacts, while the Abwehr offered him protection and perks. It's important to note that his espionage wasn't driven by loyalty to the Nazi cause, but rather by the allure of financial and social rewards. He was, in essence, a spy with benefits. While the Nazis were busy painting the world in black and white, Schindler saw a spectrum of opportunities, each shade representing a potential gain. His moral compass was less about true north and more about where the next deal might be struck. It's this ambiguity that makes Schindler such a fascinating character. He wasn't a hero in shining armor, but a man navigating a murky world with a mix of charm and cunning. Speaking of charm, Schindler could charm the stripes off a zebra if it meant sealing a deal. His charisma was legendary, a blend of suavity and sincerity served with a side of whiskey. It's said that he could walk into a room full of skeptics and leave with a room full of admirers. Over a glass of fine whiskey, he would weave conversations like a spider spins a web, each word carefully chosen to ensnare his audience. He was a master of the social game, a man who understood that sometimes the best business deals are made at the bottom of a glass rather than across a ballroom table. But let's not romanticize too much. Schindler was no saint, and his early days in the Nazi Party were marked by questionable alliances and dubious dealings. He was as much a businessman as he was a party member, using his position to further his own interests. In the cutthroat world of wartime politics, Schindler was a player who understood that survival often meant dirty hands and blurred lines. Yet even as he maneuvered through this political minefield, Schindler managed to maintain a certain likability. Perhaps it was his genuine interest in people, or his ability to make everyone feel like the most important person in the room. Whatever the reason, Schindler's legacy is a complex tapestry of contradictions. A man who could be both self-serving and selfless, opportunistic and altruistic. Amidst all this, Schindler's ability to adapt was his greatest asset. The world was changing faster than a chameleon on a rainbow, and Schindler changed with it, always a step ahead of the curve. As the war loomed on the horizon, he set his sights on Poland, a land ripe with potential for those bold enough to seize it. Schindler was nothing if not bold, and his next chapter would see him transform from an opportunistic businessman into something far more significant. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's leave Schindler in the midst of his metamorphosis, a man on the brink of history, navigating a world where the lines between right and wrong were as blurred as a Monet painting. As we continue this journey, remember that Schindler's story is one of complexity and contradiction, a tale that defies simple narratives and easy conclusions. Stay tuned, because the best, or rather, the most unexpected, is yet to come. As Schindler set his sights on Poland, little did anyone suspect that his next venture would lead to a legacy far more enduring than any of his previous business escapades. In 1939, with war clouds thickening over Europe like a darkening sky before a storm, Schindler seized the opportunity to acquire a factory in Krakow. This wasn't just any factory, it was a Deutsche Emailwarenfabrik, or DEF, which, let's be honest, is a bit of a mouthful, but it was more than just a name. It was Schindler's ticket to the big leagues of wartime profiteering, a chance to turn tin into gold and, unwittingly, to turn his life around in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The factory itself was a relic of previous industrial glory, a sprawling complex that once hummed with the sounds of peacetime production. Schindler, ever the opportunist, saw not just machines but potential to produce enamelware that the German army would gobble up faster than a kid with candy. And here's the kicker. By employing Jewish workers, Schindler could save significantly on labor costs. It was a cold, calculating business decision, one that spoke volumes about the intersection of economics and ethics during wartime. Jewish workers, categorized under the Nazi regime as essential labor, came with a price tag that was, for Schindler, a bargain too good to pass up. But running a wartime factory wasn't exactly a stroll in the park. There were quotas to meet, raw materials to source, and, of course, the ever-present scrutiny of Nazi officials who saw every non-German worker as both asset and threat. The logistical realities were mind-boggling. Imagine trying to operate a business where your suppliers are as reliable as a paper umbrella in a thunderstorm. Steel was scarce, coal was rationed, and the black market was as tempting as it was treacherous. Amidst this chaos, Schindler navigated with a mix of charm and cunning, always keeping one eye on the ledger and the other on his ever-growing workforce. And what a workforce it was. By 1944, Schindler's factory employed around 1,700 workers, the majority of whom were Jewish. Officially, they were producing enamelware, pots and pans, items crucial for the German war machine. But as the war dragged on, Schindler's focus began to shift from profit to people. The transformation wasn't immediate, nor was it without its own complexities. It was a gradual awakening, sparked by the grim realities faced by his workers and the moral quagmire of Nazi policies. The factory became a sanctuary, a place where workers were protected from the horrors of extermination camps. Schindler's motivations evolved in tandem with the war's progression, a journey as unpredictable as the man himself. Maybe it was the human stories behind the numbers, the faces behind the workforce, that chipped away at his capitalist veneer. Or perhaps it was the sheer absurdity of a system that dehumanized individuals based on nothing more than ideology. Whatever the catalyst, Schindler's actions began to speak louder than his past opportunism. He bribed officials, falsified documents, and did whatever it took to keep his workers safe. Talk about a plot twist. Running his factory was nothing short of a juggling act, with Schindler playing the role of ringmaster in a circus of wartime absurdity. There were frequent inspections, and each one was a potential disaster. Schindler mastered the art of schmoozing Nazi officers, often over a bottle of fine cognac, using his charisma to gloss over any discrepancies that might have raised eyebrows. Meanwhile, his workers were producing not just enamelware, but also munitions that were deliberately flawed, a subtle act of sabotage that flew under the radar of even the most eagle-eyed inspectors. It was a delicate dance, one that required nerve, cunning, and no small amount of luck. One might be tempted to paint Schindler as a hero in shining armor, but the reality was far more nuanced. He was a flawed savior, a man whose motivations were as layered as an onion complex, multifaceted and sometimes tear-inducing. Yet, amidst the chaos and the moral ambiguity, Schindler found a purpose that transcended profit. His factory became a beacon of hope in a world gone mad, a place where life was valued and protected even as the world outside descended into darkness. In the end, Schindler's story is one of contradictions. He was a man who thrived on chaos, yet found clarity amidst the turmoil. He was a businessman who discovered that the most valuable asset wasn't money, but humanity. And as he navigated the treacherous waters of war, Schindler's factory in Krakow became more than just a business. It became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The story of Oskar Schindler is far from over. As we delve further into his journey, remember that the lines between right and wrong, hero and villain, are often blurred. Schindler's legacy is not one of black and white, but a rich tapestry of shades and hues, each thread telling a story of courage, contradiction, and the unyielding capacity for change. Stay with us, because the tale of Schindler's factory and the lives it saved is only just beginning. As the echoes of industry reverberated through Schindler's factory, it became increasingly clear that this was no ordinary business operation. This was the backdrop for one of history's most audacious maneuvers, a factory serving as a lifeline in a world gone mad. What began as a cold business calculation morphed into a complex moral tapestry with Schindler at the center, weaving together threads of survival and defiance. Now, let's talk about Schindler's List, the stuff of legend and Hollywood fame, but also a document of gritty reality. This wasn't some epic, pre-planned saga of heroism. It was a desperate act of defiance born out of chaos. By 1944, as the war's vicious tides began to turn, the Nazis stepped up their campaign to exterminate the Jewish population with chilling efficiency. Labor camps were being liquidated faster than a flash sale, and Schindler's workers faced imminent deportation to Auschwitz, an express ticket to oblivion. Enter Itzhak Stern, Schindler's Jewish accountant and confidant, whose meticulous record-keeping would become instrumental in crafting the list. Together, they concocted a plan that was as audacious as it was absurd: create a roster of essential workers who would be transferred to a new factory in Brunlitz, Czechoslovakia. The goal was simple, yet profound: save as many lives as possible. This wasn't just a matter of jotting down names and calling it a day. Oh no, my friends, it was a high-stakes game of bluff and bravado. Schindler had to convince Nazi officials that these workers were indispensable to the war effort, a task akin to selling sand in the Sahara. The list ultimately grew to include around 1,200 names, each one a life hanging in the balance, each one a triumph of cunning over cruelty. Let's not sugarcoat it. Compiling this list was nothing short of a bureaucratic nightmare. Imagine navigating a labyrinth of Nazi red tape, each twist and turn fraught with peril. Schindler and Stern had to justify every name, every role, often fabricating job titles and qualifications to suit their narrative. It was a masterclass in creative accounting, with survival as the ultimate bottom line. The costs were staggering, both financially and emotionally. Schindler poured his personal fortune, by then a dwindling reservoir, into bribes and black market transactions. It's estimated that he spent over 4 million Reichsmarks, a sum that would make any accountant weep. But Schindler's willingness to risk it all wasn't driven by some newfound sainthood. It was a messy, human reaction to the inhumanity around him, a testament to the flawed heroism that's as much about grit as it is about grace. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. Schindler wasn't a saint in shining armor. He was a man of contradictions. His motivations were a tangled web of self-interest, guilt, and genuine compassion. He wasn't immune to the allure of personal gain, nor was he blind to the life and death stakes of his actions. It was this very complexity that made him so effective. He understood the Nazi regime's machinery and used it to his advantage, like hacking a system from the inside with lives hanging in the balance. Schindler's interactions with Nazi officials were a blend of surreal and absurd. Imagine the scene: a dapper Schindler, suave as ever, entertaining officers with fine wine and high-stakes poker, all the while knowing that a slip of the tongue could spell disaster. His charm was his weapon, his ability to smooth over suspicions with a well-timed toast or a strategic compliment. It was a delicate dance on the razor's edge, where one misstep could shatter the fragile illusion he so carefully constructed. But let's not lose sight of the real heroes of this story, the workers themselves. They were the heart of the operation, enduring unimaginable hardships with a resilience that defied logic. Their stories, filled with moments of quiet courage and solidarity, remind us that heroism often thrives in the shadows, away from the spotlight. It was this shared humanity that Schindler tapped into, this unyielding spirit that fueled his audacious gambit. As the war sputtered toward its chaotic conclusion, Schindler's factory in Brunlitz became a sanctuary of defiance. With the endgame in sight, Schindler's priorities shifted entirely to preservation. His workers produced defective munitions, a subtle act of sabotage that underscored their resistance. It was a fitting finale to a tale of unexpected heroism, one that defied the simplistic narratives of good versus evil. And so, we find Schindler at the crossroads of history, a man whose legacy is as layered as the era he navigated. He wasn't a spotless hero, nor was he a mere opportunist. He was, in many ways, a mirror of the times, complex, conflicted, and capable of profound change. His story is a reminder that the lines between right and wrong, courage and cowardice are often blurred. But don't pack up your curiosity just yet. The story of Oskar Schindler doesn't end here. We're on the brink of uncovering the final chapters, where the consequences of his actions, both triumphant and tragic, unfold. Stay tuned for the conclusion of this remarkable journey, a tale where courage meets contradiction and where history finds its most human face. As the dust settled and the world emerged from the shadows of war, Oskar Schindler found himself at a crossroads that few could have predicted. The man who had danced with danger, outwitted Nazi bureaucrats, and saved over 1,000 lives was now faced with the kind of reality that would make an accountant weep. You see, Schindler's post-war existence wasn't exactly the Hollywood ending we might expect. Instead of basking in glory, he was navigating the choppy waters of financial ruin and fading fame like a rock star who'd spent all his royalties on champagne and caviar but now couldn't afford a tuna sandwich. In 1945, as the Allies declared victory and the world began to piece itself back together, Schindler fled to Germany with his wife Emily and a suitcase full of regrets. His factory, once a beacon of defiance, was left behind, and so was most of his wealth. Those millions of Reichsmarks he'd spent on bribes and black market deals to save his workers? Well, let's just say that the return on investment was measured in lives, not dollars. Schindler was broke in the most poetic way possible, rich in spirit but poor in pocket. But here's the kicker. Despite his monumental achievements, Schindler's post-war life was anything but a victory lap. He tried his hand at various post-war business ventures, but they all flopped harder than a fish out of water. Moving to Argentina in 1949, Schindler attempted to start a farm, but his green thumb was more of a shade of brown. Farming didn't exactly suit his flair for the dramatic, and the venture went belly up faster than you could say, crop failure. Meanwhile, the people Schindler had saved, known as Schindler-Juden, scattered across the globe, each carrying a piece of his legacy with them. They didn't forget the man who'd risked it all, and they made sure the world wouldn't either. As Schindler's financial situation continued its downward spiral, it was the very people he'd saved who stepped up to support him. Talk about irony, the saviour saved by his own saved souls. The Schindler-Juden organized financial help, a testament to the deep gratitude and respect they felt for the man who had once held their fates in his hands. Yet, despite these acts of kindness, Schindler was destined to live out his days in relative obscurity. He returned to Germany in 1958, a country still grappling with its recent past, and not exactly rolling out the red carpet for someone who'd been part of the Nazi Party, even if his actions had been anything but party-aligned. It wasn't until the 1960s that his story began to gain traction, thanks to the efforts of those he'd saved and the publication of Thomas Keneally's book. Schindler's Ark, later adapted into the iconic Spielberg film Schindler's List. The film catapulted Schindler into the realm of legend, but as with all legends, there's a tendency to polish the rough edges. The reality is that Schindler was no saint. He was a man of contradictions, a war profiteer turned humanitarian, an opportunist with a heart. His story is a potent reminder that heroism often comes wrapped in the most unexpected packages. It's tempting to view him through the lens of cinematic heroism, but to do so would miss the nuance of his humanity. Schindler passed away in 1974, aged 66, in Hildesheim, Germany. He was buried in Jerusalem, the only member of the Nazi Party to receive this honor, a testament to the profound impact of his actions. His grave, inscribed with the words, "The righteous among the nations," serves as a poignant reminder of the legacy he left behind, a legacy etched not in marble, but in the lives of those he saved. So, what do we make of Schindler's tale? It's a story that defies easy categorization, much like the man himself. It's a narrative that challenges our perceptions of good and evil, that blurs the lines between heroism and self-interest. Schindler wasn't a paragon of virtue. He was a flawed man who, when faced with the darkest of times, chose to let his better nature shine through. He reminds us that history isn't just about grand gestures, but about the quiet, often messy, acts of courage that ripple through time. In the end, Schindler's legacy isn't just about the lives he saved, but about the complex nature of human morality. His story invites us to question the simplistic narratives of history, and to embrace the messy, beautiful contradictions that make up the human experience. It's a reminder that within each of us lies the capacity for both profound selfishness and extraordinary altruism. And perhaps that's the real lesson here, that heroes aren't born. They're forged in the fires of circumstance, shaped by the choices they make when the world is watching and when it isn't. As the curtain falls on Schindler's story, we find ourselves left with more questions than answers. But maybe that's fitting for a tale that defies easy conclusions. Schindler's life was a tapestry of contradictions, a reminder that the most compelling stories are those that challenge our understanding of the past and force us to confront the complexities of the human condition. And in that complexity, we find the truest reflection of history, a mirror that shows us not just where we've been, but where we might yet go. In the shadow of China's rolling hills and rice paddies, a baby boy named Mao Zedong made his entrance into the world on December 26, 1893. His birthplace, Shaoshan, was a village that didn't even make most maps. Hardly the setting you'd expect for a future leader whose every move would later be dissected in history classes worldwide. But hey, every mighty river starts as a trickle, right? Mao grew up in a household that was a little more Confucian classic than Communist Manifesto. His father, Mao Yicheng, was a grain dealer with a wallet thicker than most in their neck of the woods. Despite this, young Mao's upbringing wasn't exactly luxurious. His father was a strict disciplinarian who believed that corporal punishment was the best way to educate a kid. A belief that, let's just say, didn't exactly produce the warmest father-son relationship. Meanwhile, his mother, Wen Qimei, was a devout Buddhist who instilled in him a sense of compassion that might seem a bit ironic given his later years. Now, Mao didn't have the typical childhood of a future revolutionary. No cloak and dagger stuff, just a lot of reading. And what did he read? Confucian texts, of course. Confucius was the ancient Chinese philosopher who had more to say about proper conduct than most modern-day self-help gurus. However, it's worth noting that Mao eventually found Confucius about as appealing as a wet sock, particularly as he started engaging with newer, more radical ideas. Fast forward to 1911. The Xinhai Revolution was about to make a splash, and 17-year-old Mao was ready to dip his toes into the pool of political activism. This revolution was meant to end over 2 millennia of imperial rule and toss the Qing dynasty out on its ear. Romantic, right? Except the reality was a bit less glamorous. Think more Game of Thrones finale than revolutionary blockbuster. While the revolution did eventually lead to the establishment of the Republic of China, it involved a lot of confused skirmishes and political backstabbing. Mao found himself swept up in the excitement, joining a local regiment in Changsha. While he never saw combat, he did get a front-row seat to the pandemonium that was China's political landscape at the time. This was his first taste of the power struggles that would characterize much of his later life. The revolution may not have been the hero's journey of law, but it did forge a fire in Mao that would burn for decades. In the years that followed, Mao dabbled in a variety of jobs that were more mundane than revolutionary. Let's talk about that assistant librarian gig. After enrolling at Peking University in 1919, Mao landed a job under Li Dazhao, a librarian who would later be one of the founders of the Chinese Communist Party. This was before libraries became synonymous with shushing and overdue fines. Books were Mao's escape hatch into new ideologies, and Li was the mentor who handed him the key. It was in the dusty stacks of Peking University that Mao first encountered Marxism, a philosophy that would eventually become his bread and butter, or rather, his rice and soy sauce. Contrary to the myth of Mao, the eternal revolutionary, his early career was marked by more contemplation than action. He was an intellectual sponge, soaking up ideas from everyone he met, including Chen Duxiu and other early Chinese communists. This period was less about storming barricades and more about debating the finer points of Marxism over cups of strong Chinese tea. It's easy to romanticize these early years as a time of lofty ideals and noble pursuits. But let's not kid ourselves. Mao was also a young man trying to find his place in a rapidly changing world. He was a product of his time, grappling with the seismic shifts happening all around him. The China of Mao's youth was a country in flux, torn between tradition and modernity east and west. These contradictions would become a hallmark of Mao's life, from his rural roots to his eventual role as the architect of communist China. Although the myth of Mao often paints him as the quintessential peasant turned revolutionary, the truth is more complex. His formative years were less about fighting tyranny and more about navigating the murky waters of early 20th century Chinese politics. The revolution wasn't a triumphant march toward utopia, but a turbulent ride with more than a few wrong turns. So, while the image of Mao as a heroic figure rising from humble beginnings is appealing, it's a bit of a fairy tale. Sure, he was born into modest circumstances, but he was also a product of an educational system that valued intellectual rigor. And while he was certainly passionate about change, he was just as much a pragmatist, biding his time and choosing his battles carefully. As we dig deeper into Mao's life, it's essential to recognize the duality that defined him. He was both a dreamer and a strategist, a man who could wax poetic about peasant uprisings while meticulously planning his next political move. The contradictions in his early life laid the foundation for the complex leader he would eventually become. And let's be honest, it's these contradictions that make his story endlessly fascinating, even if they don't fit neatly into the legend. Mao's rise from an intellectual sponge to a heavyweight in the Chinese Communist Party wasn't exactly a walk in the park, or, more accurately, a march through the countryside. Let's dive into the saga that propelled him into the stratosphere of Chinese politics, the Long March. This isn't just any stroll through the woods. We're talking about a 6,000-mile endurance test that would make even an ultramarathon look like a Sunday jog. The Long March was the kind of event that would either make you a legend or leave you lost in the annals of history's forgotten footnotes. It was 1934, and the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, was in a bit of a pickle. The nationalist forces led by Chiang Kai-shek were breathing down their necks, and let's just say the air was getting a bit too hot for comfort. Mao and his comrades needed a bold move, a Hail Mary pass, if you will, to escape encirclement in the Jiangxi Soviet. And thus began the Long March, a grueling retreat that's been romanticized to the point of sainthood in communist lore. Now, the myth goes that this was a heroic exodus, a triumphant tale of resilience and brotherhood. But let's take off those rose-colored glasses for a second. Picture tens of thousands of soldiers, not to mention the women and children who tagged along, embarking on this epic journey with nothing but resolve and a few supplies. And by a few, I mean barely enough to fill a backpack. Logistics? More like a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to keep thousands of people fed, sheltered, and motivated while dodging enemy bullets and navigating treacherous terrains. It was less epic saga and more survival reality show. The harsh realities faced by these marches were anything but romantic. Starvation was a constant companion, and disease travelled with them like an unwelcome guest. It's estimated that of the 86,000 people who started the march, only about 7,000 made it to the finish line. Yeah, those numbers don't exactly scream success story. And yet, it was precisely this tale of sacrifice, hardship, and ultimate survival that became a cornerstone of communist propaganda. The CCP didn't just survive the Long March, they emerged stronger, with Mao Zedong now a central figure, his leadership solidified by the sheer audacity of their survival. So, what made Mao stand out during this ordeal? Was it his military genius, or perhaps his exceptional charisma? Well, the truth is a bit less glamorous. Mao was a pragmatist, a master of adapting to his circumstances. His knack for strategic retreats wasn't just about running away. It was about living to fight another day. In the chess game of war, sometimes the best move isn't capturing the queen but knowing when to sacrifice a pawn. The Long March wasn't just a physical journey, but an ideological one. It hardened the resolve of the remaining troops and instilled a sense of unity that would be crucial for the battles ahead. Mao's ability to maintain morale, even when their situation looked bleaker than a Monday morning, was nothing short of miraculous. He was able to convince his followers that every grueling step was a step toward a brighter future, a future where they would be the architects of a new China. But let's not get too caught up in the legend without acknowledging the reality. The Long March was brutal, and its success was as much a result of unforeseen opportunities as it was of brilliant leadership. For instance, the rugged terrain that posed such a challenge also provided natural defences against the nationalist forces. And luck played its part too, like those times when enemy forces just happened to be busy elsewhere. It's a reminder that history isn't just made by great men, but sometimes by great timing. To put it bluntly, the romanticized version of these events is about as accurate as a Hollywood blockbuster based on a true story. Sure, there's a kernel of truth, but the reality was messier, more complex, and definitely less glamorous. Yet, it's precisely this messiness that makes the story so compelling. The Long March was an odyssey that tested the limits of human endurance and leadership. It wasn't the fairy tale of courage that some might want it to be, but a testament to the gritty, unyielding determination of those who survived it. So, while the myths paint Mao as a heroic figure leading his people through impossible odds, the truth is both more mundane and more extraordinary. Mao wasn't just a leader, he was a survivor, someone who could navigate the chaos and emerge not only intact but triumphant. And in the end, isn't that what makes history so fascinating? The blend of legend and reality, where every myth has a grain of truth, and every truth is just a step away from becoming legend. Stay tuned, because the story of Mao Zedong is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be as riveting as a cliffhanger in a binge-worthy series. But as any good binge-worthy series will tell you, the plot thickens. The Long March was just the prologue to Mao Zedong's most audacious act yet, the establishment of the People's Republic of China. And trust me, the drama doesn't stop there. If you thought surviving a 6,000-mile trek was impressive, wait until you hear about the Great Leap Forward. Spoiler alert, it wasn't so much a leap as a stumble off a cliff. So, October 1, 1949, marks the day Mao stands atop Tiananmen Square, declaring the birth of the People's Republic of China, waving his little red book like a magician unveiling a new trick. Millions of Chinese citizens were ready to believe in this vision of a socialist utopia. After all, who wouldn't want a society where everyone shares and prospers together? But the devil, as they say, is in the details. And in this case, the details would lead to one of the most catastrophic periods of modern history. Enter the Great Leap Forward, Mao's grand plan to catapult China from an agrarian society into an industrial powerhouse overnight. The vision? A Chinese version of a five-star buffet where steel and grain flowed endlessly. The reality? More like a poorly managed potluck where everyone forgot to bring food. The plan kicked off in 1958, and Mao wanted to see outputs rivaling Western industrial powers. But instead of a steady climb, China's economy was about to take a nosedive that would make a roller coaster look like a kiddie ride. Now, Mao's strategy wasn't just ambitious, it was borderline delusional. He set impossibly high targets, like producing 10.7 million tons of steel annually. Sounds impressive, right? Until you realize that backyard furnaces were being used to melt down anything metal, including pots and pans. Yeah, turns out turning your kitchenware into pig iron doesn't exactly lead to high-quality steel. But hey, the numbers looked great on paper, and isn't that what really matters? But the steel fiasco was just one half of the tragedy. The other was agriculture. Collectivization was the name of the game, and individual farms were merged into massive communes. In theory, this was supposed to increase efficiency. In practice, it was like trying to organize a flash mob where nobody knew the dance moves. Farmers were encouraged to plant crops so densely that they choked each other out. Grain production, they were told, would skyrocket. Spoiler, it didn't. And then there were the infamous sparrow campaigns. In a move that would make even Wile E. Coyote scratch his head, Mao decided to wage war on sparrows, blaming them for eating too much grain. The result? An ecological imbalance that led to insect infestations which, you guessed it, destroyed crops. Oops. So, what were the numbers behind this leap? During the Great Leap Forward, it's estimated that around 45 million people died from starvation, overwork, or execution. That's about the population of modern-day Spain wiped out in 4 years. A leap forward? More like a leap into an abyss. Mao's ambitious visions were often built on a foundation shakier than a house of cards in a windstorm. And yet, the narrative spun by the state was one of unprecedented progress. Propaganda posters showed smiling workers and bountiful harvests, all while rural areas were mired in famine and despair. The reality was as stark as the contrast between these glossy posters and the grim truth on the ground. The Great Leap Forward wasn't just an economic disaster, it was a human tragedy on an unimaginable scale. And yet, somehow, Mao's vision remained appealing to some, cloaked in the seductive allure of a better tomorrow. It's a testament to the power of ideology and the lengths to which people will go to believe in a dream, even when it turns into a nightmare. So why did Mao's policies go so disastrously wrong? A mix of factors. For starters, there was a deadly combination of hubris and fear. Local officials, terrified of falling out of favour, often exaggerated their production figures to meet the unattainable target set by Mao. This created a false sense of success and led to even more unrealistic goals. The truth was buried under layers of bureaucracy and propaganda. Moreover, the centralized planning that was supposed to streamline production became a bureaucratic quagmire. Decisions that should have been made by those with their hands in the dirt were instead dictated by distant officials who had never stepped foot on a farm. The result? A system that was as efficient as a square wheel. And then there's the cultural aspect. Mao's cult of personality meant that dissent was not just discouraged, it was dangerous. Criticism of the policies was seen as criticism of Mao himself, and that was a fast track to a dangerous place. When you're surrounded by yes-men more interested in keeping their heads than speaking the truth, you get the kind of decision-making that leads to disaster. But let's give credit where it's due. Mao was nothing if not resilient. Despite the catastrophes, his grip on power remained strong, bolstered by a mix of charisma, propaganda, and political maneuvering. The Great Leap Forward was a blunder of epic proportions, yet Mao's ability to maintain control is a testament to his political savvy, even if it came at a terrible cost. The Great Leap Forward offers a stark lesson in the dangers of unchecked power and the perils of ideology over pragmatism. It's a reminder that visions of utopia can quickly turn dystopian when divorced from reality. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming evidence of failure, the allure of Mao's vision was difficult to shake. It's a narrative as compelling as it is cautionary, a tale of ambition, hubris, and the human cost of political folly. As we continue to explore Mao's legacy, it's crucial to remember both the myths and the harsh truths. The Great Leap Forward was neither a leap nor forward, but a misstep that underscored the complexity of Mao's leadership. The story of Mao Zedong is far from over, with more twists and turns waiting in the chapters ahead. Stay tuned, because if history has taught us anything, it's that the past is never quite as simple as it seems. And so, with Mao's Great Leap Forward having stumbled into an economic and humanitarian pitfall, you'd think the man might opt for a little introspection, maybe take up meditation or knitting. But no, Mao had his sights set on a new venture, one that would make the Great Leap seem like a minor fender-bender in the grand demolition derby of Chinese history. Enter the Cultural Revolution, a decade-long roller coaster ride that would redefine chaos and cultural destruction for generations to come. Kicking off in 1966, the Cultural Revolution was Mao's grand attempt to reassert his control and purify the Communist Party by purging it of any and all bourgeois elements. You might think of it as spring cleaning, except instead of dusting off shelves, Mao was uprooting entire cultural foundations. His motivations? A blend of paranoia, ideological fervour, and a sprinkling of good old-fashioned power consolidation. Because if there's anything history teaches us, it's that nothing says, "I love my country," like dismantling its cultural heritage. Now, Mao's playbook was straightforward: mobilize the youth, the Red Guards, to challenge authority and root out perceived enemies of the state. The irony of empowering a bunch of teenagers to dictate cultural policy is not lost here. Imagine handing the keys of a Ferrari to a kid who just got their learner's permit and saying, "Have at it." The Red Guards took to their task with the enthusiasm of kids who just discovered energy drinks, unleashing a wave of destruction that left virtually no corner of Chinese society untouched. Statues were toppled, libraries stripped of books, and temples reduced to rubble. The campaign against the four-old's old customs, culture, habits, and ideas was less about creative renewal and more akin to cultural arson. Schools and universities were shut down, their curriculums deemed too tainted by Western or traditional Chinese thought. In a twist of theatrical irony, even Confucius, the philosophical granddaddy of Chinese thought, was dragged through the mud. Because nothing screams progress like erasing millennia of cultural development, right? The societal impact? Catastrophic. Families were torn apart as children denounced parents and colleagues turned on one another in a desperate bid to prove their revolutionary zeal. You know things are dire when familial loyalty gets tossed aside like last season's fashion. The Cultural Revolution wasn't just a cultural purge, it was a psychological one, sowing distrust and leaving scars that would linger long after the chaos subsided. And let's not forget the raw numbers. It's estimated that up to 2 million people lost their lives during this period, either through execution or driven to suicide by relentless persecution. Millions more were sent to rural labour camps, ostensibly to be re-educated through hard labour, a euphemism that would make George Orwell nod knowingly. Whole professions were upended, as intellectuals and artists found themselves targeted as enemies of the state. Even the People's Liberation Army wasn't immune, as Mao reshuffled military leadership to ensure loyalty. But why, you might ask, did Mao pursue such a destructive course? Well, Mao was many things, but above all, he was a master of political theatre. The Cultural Revolution wasn't just about purging ideological impurities. It was a strategic move to reassert his dominance within the party and eliminate rivals. The myth of Mao as the eternal revolutionary was a powerful one, and the Cultural Revolution was his magnum opus, a chaotic symphony conducted to remind everyone who held the baton. Yet, despite the destruction, the allure of Mao's image as a revolutionary hero persisted. This paradox of perception versus reality is as baffling as it is intriguing. How could a leader responsible for so much suffering still command such reverence? Perhaps it's a testament to the power of propaganda, or the deep-seated hope that his vision of a utopian society might still be realized. Or maybe it's just that old human tendency to cling to the familiar, even when it's a source of pain. The Cultural Revolution also serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of cults of personality. When dissent is hazardous and the leader's word is law, the room for rational discourse shrinks faster than an ice cube in the desert. Mao's charisma and the propaganda machine he wielded kept his image polished, even as the nation reeled from his policies. The gap between the myth and the grim reality grew wider with each passing year, yet the myth endured. As the dust settled in the late 1970s, China was left to pick up the pieces of its shattered cultural landscape. The Cultural Revolution officially ended in 1976, coinciding with Mao's death. But the wounds it inflicted were deep, and the road to recovery proved long and arduous. The very fabric of Chinese society had been irrevocably altered, leaving a legacy of trauma that would take generations to heal. In the end, the Cultural Revolution stands as one of the 20th century's most complex and controversial chapters, a blend of revolutionary zeal, authoritarian control, and cultural devastation, all wrapped in the seductive guise of ideological purity. It's a narrative that continues to resonate, a cautionary tale of what happens when ideals are twisted by the pursuit of power. So, as we ponder the paradox of Mao Zedong, both revered and reviled, it's crucial to remember the very real human costs of his ambition. The Cultural Revolution wasn't just a political movement, it was a seismic upheaval that reshaped lives and legacies. And while the myths persist, the reality beneath is a sobering reminder of the fragility of progress and the enduring complexity of history. As we look forward to the final chapter in Mao's saga, the story is far from over. There's more to uncover about the man who reshaped a nation, a tale of power, legacy, and the indelible mark left on China and the world. But for now, let's leave Mao's myth and reality to simmer, knowing that the past is never truly past, and history, like a good drama, always has another twist in store. If Mao's Cultural Revolution was the grand finale of his chaotic symphony, then the years following his death were the encore that nobody quite knew how to handle. As the curtains fell on Mao's life in 1976, China found itself standing at a crossroads with a cultural hangover that would rival any New Year's Day. The nation faced the daunting task of untangling the legacy of a man who had been both a saviour and a scourge, depending on which side of history you stood. Let's talk legacy. Mao Zedong, the self-styled great helmsman, left behind a tapestry of myth and reality so interwoven that even the most seasoned historians need a pair of scissors to cut through it. On one hand, he's the revolutionary titan who unified China, a hero in the eyes of those who see his face on currency and statues. On the other, he's the architect of policies like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, which turned utopian dreams into dystopian nightmares. Economically, Mao's influence is as enduring as the Great Wall. His policies laid the groundwork for China's transformation into a global powerhouse, though not in the way he might have envisioned. Consider this. By the time Deng Xiaoping rolled up his sleeves to implement market reforms in the late 1970s, China was ready for a change akin to swapping a horse-drawn cart for a high-speed train. Deng's reforms turned the ship around, but let's not forget that it was Mao who initially set it afloat, albeit on a turbulent sea of collectivization and industrialization gone awry. Culturally, Mao's impact is a testament to the power of narrative. His image is still venerated in parts of China, where his larger-than-life persona is both a source of national pride and a reminder of a tumultuous past. The Cultural Revolution, despite its destructive force, left behind a paradoxical legacy of cultural resilience. It's as if China went through a cultural fever dream, only to wake up and find itself more determined than ever to preserve its heritage while embracing the future, a delicate balancing act worthy of a tightrope walker with vertigo. But how do you reconcile the myth of Mao with the stark realities of his rule? The romantic notion of the great helmsman steering China through stormy seas is appealing, sure, but the reality is that Mao's leadership was more akin to a captain with a penchant for iceberg dodging, with occasional success and frequent disaster. It's a narrative clash that continues to spark debate, even as China forges ahead into the 21st century. As you ponder Mao's lasting influence, consider the modern Chinese landscape, a booming economy interspersed with skyscrapers that pierce the sky like needles in a global haystack. Yet, beneath the gleaming facades, lies a complex web of government control and social policy that still echoes Mao's socialist ideals. The Chinese Communist Party, despite its capitalist trappings, remains a juggernaut of political power, a testament to Mao's enduring legacy of centralized authority. But let's not romanticize the past without acknowledging the cost. Mao's vision came with a hefty price tag, measured in lives lost and dreams dashed. The Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution were not just policy blunders, they were human tragedies, with a combined death toll that could populate a small country. The scars of these events run deep, manifesting in a cultural memory that is both a source of resilience and a sobering reminder of history's darker chapters. So, what can we learn from Mao's legacy? First, history is less a linear narrative and more a tangled web of contradictions. Mao was both a visionary and a tyrant, a revolutionary and a despot. His story is a cautionary tale of what happens when ideology overrides pragmatism and when the pursuit of power eclipses the welfare of people. It's a reminder that the allure of utopia can seduce even the most astute minds into overlooking the abyss beneath their feet. Second, as we look at China's place in the world today, it's evident that the echoes of Mao's era still resonate. His emphasis on self-reliance and strong central governance persists, even as China embraces global trade and technological innovation. The country's rapid ascent on the world stage is both a testament to its dynamic adaptation and a reflection of the foundational shifts that began under Mao's rule. Finally, questioning historical narratives is not just an academic exercise, but a vital practice for understanding the complexities of our shared past. Mao's story is a mosaic of triumphs and tragedies, of myths spun and realities confronted. To view him through a single lens is to miss the multifaceted nature of his impact, an impact that continues to shape the contours of Chinese society and its place in the global order. As you drift off to sleep with these thoughts swirling in your mind, remember that history is an ongoing conversation between the past and the present. Mao Zedong's legacy is not just a chapter in a textbook, but a living, breathing narrative that invites us to look beyond the myth and embrace the messy, intricate tapestry of human history. Because in the end, it's the stories we tell and the lessons we learn that guide us as we navigate the uncharted waters of tomorrow.